Chapter 12. I Will Give You Peace. In our concentration upon Ventnor, none of us had given thought to the passing of time, nor where we were going. We stripped him to the waist, and while Ruth massaged head and neck, Drake's strong fingers kneaded chest and abdomen. I had used to the utmost my somewhat limited medical knowledge. We had found no mark nor burn upon him, not even upon his hands over which had run the licking flame. The slightly purplish, cyanotic tinge of his skin had given way to a clear pallor. The skin was itself disquietingly cold, the blood pressure only slightly subnormal. The pulse was more rapid, stronger, the breathing faint but regular and with no laboring. The pupils of his eyes were contracted almost to the point of invisibility. I could get no nervous reactions whatever. I am familiar with the effects of electric shock and know what to do in such cases, but Ventnor's symptoms, while similar in part, presented other features unknown to me and most puzzling. There was a passive automatism, a perplexing muscular rigidity which caused arms and legs, hands and head to remain, doll-like, in any position placed. Several times during my labors, I had been aware of Norhala gazing down upon us, but she made no effort to help, nor did she speak. Now, my strained attention relaxing, I began to receive and note impressions from without. There was a different feeling in the air, a diminution of the magnetic tension. I smelled the blessed breath of trees and water. The light about us was clear and pearly, about the intensity of the moon at full. Looking back along the way we had been traveling, I saw a half-mile away vertical, knife-sharp edges of two facing cliffs, the gap between them a mile or more wide. Through them we must have passed, for beyond them were the radiant mists of the pit of the city, and through this precipitous gateway filtered the enveloping luminosity. On each side of us uprose, gradually converging and perpendicular scarps along whose base huddled a sparse foliage. There came a low whistle of astonishment from Drake. I turned. We were slowly gliding toward something that looked like nothing so much as a huge and shimmering bubble of mingled sapphire and turquoise, swimming up from and 2/3 above, and the balance still hidden within earth. It seemed to draw to itself the light, sending it back with gleamings of the grey-blue of the star sapphire, with pellucid azures and lazulies like clouded jades, with glistening peacock iridescences and tender, milky greens of tropic shallows. Little turrets globular and topaz, yellow and pierced, with tiny hexagonal openings clustered about it like baby bubbles just nestling down to rest. Great trees shadowed it, unfamiliar trees among whose glossy leaves blossomed in wreaths flowers pink and white as apple blossoms. From their graceful branches, strange fruits, golden and scarlet and pear-shaped, hung pendulous. It was an elfin palace, a goblin dwelling, such a bower as some mirthful, beauty-loving djinn, king of jewels, might have built from enchanted hoards for some well-beloved daughter of earth. All of 50 feet in height was the blue globe, and up to a wide and ovaled entrance ran a broad and shining roadway. Along this, the cubes swept and stopped. "My house," murmured Norhala. The attraction that had held us to the surface of the blocks relaxed, angled through changed and assisting lines of force. The hosts of minute eyes sparkling quizzically, interestedly at us, we gently slid Ventnor's body, lifted down the pony. "Enter," sighed Norhala, and waved a welcoming hand. "Tell her to wait a minute," ordered Drake. He slipped the bandage from off the pony's head, threw off the saddlebags, and led it to the side of the roadway where thick, lush grass was growing, spangled with flowerets. Then he hobbled it and rejoined us. Together we picked up Ventnor and passed slowly through the portal. We stood in a shadowed chamber. The light that filled it was translucent, and oddly enough with little of the bluish quality I had expected. Crystalline it was, the shadows crystalline, too, rigid like the facets of great crystals. And as my eyes accustomed themselves, I saw that what I had thought shadows actually were none. They were slices of semi-transparent stone, like pale moonstones, springing from the curving walls and the high dome, and bisecting and intersecting the chamber. They were pierced with oval doorways, over which fell glimmering metallic curtain silk of silver and gold. I glimpsed a pile of this silken stuff nearby, and as we laid our burden upon it, Ruth caught my arm with a little frightened cry. Through a curtained oval sidled a figure. Black and tall, its long and gnarled arms swung ape-like. Its shoulders were distorted, one so much longer than the other that the hand upon that side hung far below the knee. It walked with a curious, crab-like motion. Upon its face were stamped countless wrinkles, and its blackness seemed less that of pigmentation than the weathering of unbelievable years, the very stain of ancientness. And about neither face nor figure was there anything to show whether it was man or woman. From the twisted shoulders a short and sleeveless red tunic fell. Incredibly old the creature was, and by its corded muscles, its sinewy tendons, as incredibly powerful. It raised within me a half-sick revulsion, loathing. But the eyes were not ancient, no. Irisless, lashless, black and brilliant, they blazed out of the face's carven web of wrinkles, intent upon Norhala and filled with a flame of worship. It threw itself at her feet, prostrate, the inordinately long arms outstretched. "Mistress," it whined in a high and curiously unpleasant falsetto. "Great lady, goddess." She stretched out a sandaled foot, touched one of the black-taloned hands, and at the contact I saw a shiver of ecstasy run through the lank body. "Yuruk," she began, and paused, regarding us. "The goddess speaks. Yuruk hears. The goddess speaks." It was a chant of adoration. "Yuruk, rise. Look upon the strangers." The creature, now I knew what it was, writhed, twisted, and hideously ape-like crouched upon its haunches, hands knuckling the floor. By the amazement in the unwinking eyes, it was plain that not till now had the eunuch taken cognizance of us. The amazement fled, was replaced with a black fire of malignancy, of hatred, jealousy. "Oh," he snarled, leaped to his feet, thrust an arm toward Ruth. She gave a little cry, cowered against Drake. "None of that." He struck down the clutching arm. "Yuruk," there was a hint of anger in the bell-toned voice. "Yuruk, these belong to me. No harm must come to them. Yuruk, beware." "The goddess commands. Yuruk obeys." If fear quavered in the words, beneath was more than a trace of a sullenness, too, sinister enough. "That's a nice little playmate for her new playthings," muttered Drake. "If that bird gets the least bit gay, I shoot him pronto." He gave Ruth a reassuring hug. "Cheer up, Ruth. Don't mind that thing. He's something we can handle." Norhala waved a white hand. Yuruk sidled over to one of the curtained ovals and threw it, reappearing almost instantly with a huge platter upon which were fruits and a curdly white liquid in bowls of thick porcelain. "Eat," she said, as the gnarled black arms placed the platter at our feet. "Hungry?" asked Drake. Ruth shook her head violently. "I'm going out for the saddlebags," said Drake. "We'll use our own stuff while it lasts. I'm taking no chances on what the Yuruk lad brings, with all due respect to Norhala's good intentions." He started for the doorway. The eunuch blocked his way. "We have with us food of our own, Norhala," I explained. "He goes to get it." She nodded indifferently, clapped her hands. Yuruk shrank back and out strode Drake. "I am weary," sighed Norhala. "The way was long. I will refresh myself." She stretched out a foot toward Yuruk. He knelt, unlaced the turquoise bands, drew off the sandals. Her hands sought her breast, dwelt for an instant there. Down slipped her silken veils, clingingly, slowly, as though reluctant to unclasp her. Whispering, they fell from the high and tender breasts, the delicate rounded hips, and clustered about her feet in soft petalings, as of some flower of pale amber foam. Out of the calyx of that flower arose the gleaming miracle of her body, crowned with glowing glory of her cloudy hair. Naked she was, yet clothed with an unearthly purity, the purity of the far-flung, serene stars, of the eternal snows upon some calm, high-flung peak, the tranquil, silver dawns of spring, protected by some spell of divinity which chilled and slew the flame of desire. A maiden Ishtar, a virginal Isis, a woman yet with no more of woman's lure than if she had been some exquisite and breathing statue of mingled ivory and milk of pearls. So she stood, indifferent to us who gazed upon her, withdrawn, musing, as though she had forgotten us. And that serene indifference, with its entire absence of what we term sex consciousness, revealed to me once more how great was the abyss between us and her. Slowly she raised her arms, wound the floating tresses into a coronal. I saw Drake enter with the saddlebags, saw them drop from hands, relaxing under the shock of this amazing tableau, saw his eyes widen and fill with wonder and half-awed admiration. Now Norhala stepped out of her fallen robes and moved toward the further wall, Yuruk following. He stooped, raised an ewer of silver, and began gently to pour over her shoulders its contents. Again and again he bent and filled the vessel, dipping it into a shallow basin from which came the bubbling and chuckling of a little spring. And again I marveled at the marble smoothness and fineness of her skin, on which the caressing water left tiny silvery globules, gemming it. The eunuch slithered to one side, drew from a quaint chest clothes of white floss, patted her dry with them, threw over her shoulders a silken robe of blue. Back she floated to us, hovered over Ruth, crouching with her brother's head upon her knees. She made a motion as though to draw the girl to her, hesitated as Ruth's face set in a passion of denial. A shadow of kindness drifted through the wide, mysterious eyes. A shadow of pity joined it as she looked curiously down on Ventnor. "Bathe," she murmured, and pointed to the pool. "And rest. No harm shall come to any of you here. And you," a hand rested for a moment lightly on the girl's curly head, "when you desire it, I will again give you peace." She parted the curtains, and the eunuch, still following, was hidden beyond them. Chapter 13. Voice from the Void. Helplessly we looked at each other, then called forth, perhaps by what she saw in Drake's eyes, perhaps by another thought. Ruth's cheeks crimsoned, her head drooped. The web of her hair hid the warm rose of her face, the frozen pallor of Ventnor's. Abruptly she sprang to her feet. "Walter, Dick, something's happening to Martin." Before she had ceased, we were beside her, bending over Ventnor. His mouth was opening, slowly, slowly, with an effort agonizing to watch. Then his voice came through lips that scarcely moved, faint, faint as though it floated from infinite distances, a ghost of a voice whispering with phantom breath out of a dead throat. "Hard, hard, so hard," the whispering complained. "Don't know how long I can keep connection with voice. Was fool to shoot. Sorry might have gotten you in worse trouble, but crazy with fear for Ruth thought, too, might be worth chance. Sorry not my usual line." The thin thread of sound ceased. I felt my eyes fill with tears. It was like Ventnor to flay himself like this for what he thought stupidity, like him to make this effort to admit his supposed fault and crave forgiveness like him, as that mad attack upon the flaming disk in its own temple, surrounded by its ministers, had been so bafflingly unlike his usual cool, collected self. "Martin," I called, bending closer, "it's nothing, old friend. No one blames you. Try to rouse yourself." "Dear," it was Ruth, passionately tender, "it's me. Can you hear me?" Only speck of consciousness and motionless in the void, the whisper began again. Terribly alive, terribly alone. Seem outside space yet still in body. Can't see here, feel short-circuited from every sense, but in some strange way realize you, Ruth, Walter, Drake. See without seeing here, floating in darkness that is also light black, light indescribable. In touch, too, with these. Again the voice trailed into silence, returned, word and phrase pouring forth disconnected, with a curious and turbulent rhythm, like rushing wave crests linked by half-seen threads of the spindrift, vocal fragments of thought, swiftly assembled by some subtle faculty of the mind, as they fell into a coherent, incredible message. Group consciousness gigantic operating within our sphere, operating also in spheres of vibration, energy, force above, below one to which humanity reacts perception. Command forces known to us but in greater degree cognizant. Manipulate unknown energies, senses known to us unknown, can't realize them, fully impossible cover. Only impinge on contact points akin to our senses. Forces even these profoundly modified by additional ones, metallic, crystalline, magnetic, electric, inorganic, with every power of organic consciousness, basically same as ours, profoundly changed by differences in mechanism, through which it finds expression difference, our bodies theirs. Conscious, mobile, inexorable, invulnerable, getting clearer, see more clearly, see. The voice shrilled out in a shuddering, thin lash of despair. No, no, oh, God, no. Then clearly and solemnly. "And God said, let us make men in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." A silence. We bent closer, listening. The still, small voice took up the thread once more, but clearly further on. Something we had missed between that text from Genesis and what we were now hearing. Something that, even as he had warned us, he had not been able to articulate. The whisper broke through clearly in the middle of a sentence. "Nor is Jehovah the God of myriads of millions who through those same centuries, and centuries upon centuries before them, found earth a garden and gravened all these countless gods and goddesses, only phantom barriers raised by man to stand between him and the eternal forces man's instinct has always warned him are ever in readiness to destroy. That do destroy him as soon as his vigilance relaxes. His resistance weakens the eternal, ruthless law that will annihilate humanity the instant it runs counter to that law and turns its will and strength against itself. A little pause. Then came these singular sentences. Weaklings praying for miracles to make easy the path their own will should clear. Beggars who whine for alms from dreams. Shirkers each struggling to place upon his God the burden whose carrying alone can give him strength to walk free and unafraid, himself godlike among the stars. And now distinctly, unfalteringly, the voice went on. Dominion over all the earth. Yes, as long as man is fit to rule, no longer. Science has warned us. Where was the mammal when the giant reptiles reigned, slinking hidden and afraid in the dark and secret places? Yet man sprang from these skulking beasts. For how long a time in the history of earth has man been master of it? For a breath, for a cloud's passing, and will remain master only until something grown stronger wrests mastery from him, even as he wrested it from his ravening kind. As they took it from the reptiles, as did the reptiles from the giant saurians which snatched it from the nightmare rulers of the Triassic, and so down to whatever held sway in the murk of earth dawn. Life, 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 life everywhere struggling for completion. Life crowding other life aside, battling for its moment of supremacy, gaining it, holding it for one rise and fall of the wings of time, beating through eternity and then hurled down, trampled under the feet of another straining life whose hour has struck. Life crowding outside every barred threshold in a million circling worlds, yes, in a million rushing universes, pressing against the doors, bursting them down, overwhelming, forcing out those dwellers who had thought themselves so secure. And these, the voice suddenly dropped, became thickly, vibrantly resonant. Over the threshold, within the house of man, nor does he even dream that his doors are down. These things of metal whose brains are thinking crystals, things that suck their strength from the sun, and whose blood is the lightning. The sun, he cried. There lies their weakness. The voice rose in pitch, grew strident. Go back to the city. Go back to the city, Walter Drake. They are not invulnerable. No, the sun strike them through the sun. Go into the city, not invulnerable. The keeper of the cones strike at the cones when the keeper of the cones are HHR. We shrank back appalled, for from the parted, scarcely moving lips in the unchanging face, a gust of laughter, mad, mocking, terrifying, racked its way. Vulnerable under the law even as we, the cones. Go, he gasped. A tremor shook him. Slowly the mouth closed. Martin, brother, wept Ruth. I thrust my hand into his breast, felt the heart beating with a curious suggestion of stubborn, unshakable strength, as though every vital force had concentrated there as in a beleaguered citadel. But Ventnor himself, the consciousness that was Ventnor, was gone, had withdrawn into that subjective void in which he had said he floated, a lonely, sentient atom, his one line of communication with us cut, severed from us as completely as though he were, as he had described it, outside space. And Drake and I looked at each other's eyes, neither daring to be first to break the silence of which the muffled sobbing of the girl seemed to be the sorrowful soul. Chapter 14. Free, but a monster. The peculiar ability of the human mind to slip so readily into the refuge of the commonplace after, or even during, some well-nigh intolerable crisis, has been to me long one of the most interesting phenomena of our psychology. It is instinctively a protective habit, of course, acquired through precisely the same causes that are given to animals their protective coloration, the stripes, say, of the zebra and tiger, that blend so cunningly with the barred and speckled shadowings of bush and jungle, the twig and leaf-like shapes and hues of certain insects. In fact, all that natural camouflage which was the basis of the art of concealment so astonishingly developed in the late war. Like the animals of the wild, the mind of man moves through a jungle, the jungle of life, passing along paths beaten out by the thought of his countless forefathers in their progress from birth to death. And these paths are bordered and screened, figuratively and literally, with bush and trees of his own selection, setting out and cultivation shelters of the familiar, the habitual, the customary. On these ancestral paths, within these barriers of usage, man moves hidden and secure as the animals in their haunts, or so he thinks. Outside them lie the wildernesses and the gardens of the unknown, and man's little trails are but rabbit runs in an illimitable forest. But they are home to him. Therefore it is that he scurries from some open place of revelation, some storm of emotion, some strength-testing struggle, back into the shelter of the obvious, finding it an intellectual environment that demands no slightest expenditure of mental energy or initiative, strength to sally forth again into the unfamiliar. I crave pardon for this digression. I set it down because now I remember how, when Drake at last broke the silence that had closed in upon the passing of that still, small voice, the essence of these thoughts occurred to me. He strode over to the weeping girl, and in his voice was a roughness that angered me until I realized his purpose. "Get up, Ruth," he ordered. "He came back once and he'll come back again. Now let him be and help us get a meal together. I'm hungry." She looked up at him, incredulously, indignation rising. "Eat," she exclaimed. "You can be hungry." "You bet I can, and I am," he answered cheerfully. "Come on, we've got to make the best of it." "Ruth," I broke in gently, "we'll all have to think about ourselves a little if we're to be of any use to him. You must eat and then rest." "No use crying in the milk, even if it's spilt," observed Drake, even more cheerfully brutal. "I learned that at the front, where we got so we'd yelp for food, even when the lads who'd been bringing it were all mixed up in it." She lifted Ventnor's head from her lap, rested it on the silks, arose, eyes wrathful, her little hands closed in fists as though to strike him. "Oh, you brute," she whispered, "and I thought, oh, I hate you." "That's better," said Dick. "Go ahead and hit me if you want. The madder you get, the better you'll feel." For a moment, I thought she was going to take him at his word. Then her anger fled. "Thanks, Dick," she said quietly. And while I sat studying Ventnor, they put together a meal from the stores, brewed tea over the spirit lamp, with water from the bubbling spring. In these commonplaces, I knew that she at least was finding relief from that strain of the abnormal under which we had labored so long. To my surprise, I found that I was hungry, and with deep relief, I watched Ruth partake of food and drink, even though lightly. About her seemed to hover something of the ethereal, elusive, and disquieting. Was it the strangely pellucid light that gave the effect? I wondered, and knew it was not, for as I scanned her covertly, there fell upon her face that shadow of inhuman tranquillity, of unearthly withdrawal which, I guessed, had more than anything else maddened Ventnor into his attack upon the disk. I watched her fight against it, drive it back. White-lipped, she raised her head and met my gaze, and in her eyes I read both terror and shame. It came to me that, painful as it might be for her, the time for questioning had come. "Ruth," I said, "I know it's not necessary to remind you that we're in a tight place. Every fact and every scrap of knowledge that we can lay hold of is of the utmost importance in enabling us to determine our course. I'm going to repeat your brother's question: what did Norhala do to you? And what happened when you were floating before the disk?" The blaze of interest in Drake's eyes at these questions changed to amazement at her stricken recall from them. "There was nothing," she whispered then defiantly, "nothing. I don't know what you mean." "Ruth," I spoke sharply now in my own perplexity. "You do know. You must tell us for his sake." I pointed toward Ventnor. She drew a long breath. "You're right, of course," she said unsteadily. "Only I thought maybe I could fight it out myself, but you'll have to know there's a taint upon me." I caught in Drake's swift glance the echo of my own thrill of apprehension for her sanity. "Yes," she said now quietly, "some new and alien thing within my heart, my brain, my soul. It came to me from Norhala when we rode the flying block, and he sealed upon me when I was in his," again she crimsoned, "embrace." And as we gazed at her, incredulously, "A thing that urges me to forget you too, and Martin and all the world I've known. That tries to pull me from you from altered drift, untroubled in some vast calm filled with an ordered ecstasy of peace, and whose calling I want, God help me, oh, so desperately to heed. It whispered to me first," she said, "from Norhala when she put her arm around me. It whispered, and then seemed to float from her and cover me like a veil, and from head to foot. It was a quietness and peace that held within it a happiness at one and the same time, utterly tranquil and utterly free. I seemed to be at the doorway to unknown ecstasies, and the life I had known only a dream, and you, all of you, even Martin, dreams within a dream. You weren't real, and you did not matter." "Hypnotism," muttered Drake as she paused. "No," she shook her head. "No more than that. The wonder of it grew and grew. I thrilled with it. I remember nothing of that ride, saw nothing except that once through the peace enfolding me pierced warning that Martin was in peril, and I broke through to see him clutching Norhala, and to see floating up in her eyes death for him. And I saved him and again forgot. Then, when I saw that beautiful, flaming shape, I felt no terror, no fear, only a tremendous joyous anticipation, as though, she faltered, hung her head, then leaving that sentence unfinished, whispered. And when it lifted me, it was as though I had come at last out of some endless black ocean of despair into the full sun of paradise. "Ruth!" cried Drake, and at the pain in his cry she winced. "Wait!" she said, and held up a little, tremulous hand. You asked, and now you must listen. She was silent, and when once more she spoke, her voice was low, curiously rhythmic, her eyes rapt. I was free from every human fetter of fear or sorrow or love or hate, free even of hope for what was there to hope for when everything desirable was mine, and I was elemental, one with the eternal things, yet fully conscious that I was I. It was as though I were the shining shadow of a star afloat upon the breast of some still and hidden woodland pool, as though I were a little wind dancing among the mountain tops, a mist whirling down a quiet glen, a shimmering lance of the aurora pulsing in the high solitudes. And there was music, strange and wondrous music, and terrible, but not terrible to me who was part of it. Vast chords and singing themes that rang like clusters of little swinging stars, and harmonies that were like the very voice of infinite law resolving within itself all discords, and all passionless, yet rapturous. Out of the thing that held me, out from its fires pulsed vitality, a flood of inhuman energy in which I was bathed. And it was as though this energy were reassembling me, fitting me even closer to the elemental things, changing me fully into them. I felt the little tendrils touching, caressing. Then came the shots. Awakening was dreadful, a struggling back from drowning. I saw Martin blasted. I drove the spell away from me, tore it away. And oh, Walter Dickett hurt hand for a breath before I ran to him. It was like coming from a world in which there was no disorder, no sorrow, no doubts, a rhythmic, harmonious world of light and music, into a world that was like a black and dirty kitchen. And it's there, her voice rose hysterically. It's still within me, whispering, urging me away from you, from Martin, from every human thing, bidding me give myself up, surrender my humanity. Its seal, she sobbed. Know his seal, an alien consciousness sealed within me that tries to make the human me a slave that waits to overcome my will, and, if I surrender, gives me freedom, an incredible freedom, but makes me, being still human, a monster. She hid her face in her hands, quivering. If I could sleep, she wailed, but I'm afraid to sleep. I think I shall never sleep again. For sleeping, how do I know what I may be when I wake? I caught Drake's eye. He nodded. I slipped my hand down into the medicine case, brought forth a certain potent and tasteless combination of drugs which I carry upon explorations. I dropped a little into her cup, then held it to her lips. Like a child, unthinking, she obeyed and drank. But I'll not surrender. Her eyes were tragic. Never think it. I can win, don't you know I can? Win? Drake dropped down beside her, drew her toward him. Bravest girl I've known, of course you'll win. And remember, this 9/10 of what you're thinking now is purely overwrought nerves and weariness. You'll win, and we'll win, never doubt it. I don't, she said. I know it, oh, it will be hard, but I will. Chapter 15. The House of Norhala. Her eyes closed, her body relaxed. The potion had done its work quickly. We laid her beside Ventnor on the pile of silken stuffs, covered them both with a fold, then looked at each other long and silently, and I wondered whether my face was as grim and drawn as his. It appears, he said at last, curtly, that it's up to you and me for powwow quick. I hope you're not sleepy. I am not, I answered as curtly. the edge of nerves in his manner of questioning doing nothing to soothe my own. And even if I were, I would hardly expect to put all the burden of the present problem upon you by going to sleep. For God's sake, don't be a prima donna, he flared up. I meant no offense. I'm sorry, Dick, I said. We're both a little jumpy, I guess. He nodded, gripped my hand. It wouldn't be so bad, he muttered, if all four of us were all right. But Ventnor's down and out, and God alone knows for how long. And Ruth has all the trouble we have and some special ones of her own. I've an idea, he hesitated, an idea that there was no exaggeration in that story. She told an idea that if anything she underplayed it. I, too, I replied somberly. And to me, it is the most hideous phase of this whole situation and, for reasons not all connected with Ruth, I added. Hideous, he repeated. Unthinkable, yet all this is unthinkable, and still it is, and Ventnor coming back that way, like a lost soul finding voice. Was it raving, Goodwin? Or could he have been, how was it he put it in touch with these things and their purpose? Was that message truth? Ask yourself that question, I said. Man, you know it was truth. Had not inklings of it come to you even before he spoke? They had to me. His message was but an interpretation, a synthesis of facts I, for one, lacked the courage to admit. I, too, he nodded. But he went further than that. What did he mean by the keeper of the cones and that the things were vulnerable under the same law that orders us? And why did he command us to go back to the city? How could he know? How could he? There's nothing inexplicable in that, at any rate, I answered. Abnormal sensitivity of perception due to the cutting off of all sensual impressions. There's nothing uncommon in that. You have its most familiar form in the sensitivity of the blind. You've watched the same thing at work in certain forms of hypnotic experimentation, haven't you? Through the operation of entirely understandable causes, the mind gains the power to react to vibrations that normally pass unperceived, is able to project itself through this keying up of perception into a wider area of consciousness than the normal. Just as in certain diseases of the ear, the sufferer, though deaf to sounds within the average range of hearing, is fully aware of sound vibrations far above and far below those the healthy ear registers. I know, he said. I don't need to be convinced. But we accept these things in theory, and when we get up against them for ourselves, we doubt. How many people are there in Christendom, do you think, who believe that the Saviour ascended from the dead, but who, if they saw it today, would insist upon medical inspection, doctors' certificates, a clinic, and even after that render a Scotch verdict? I'm not speaking irreverently, I'm just stating a fact. Suddenly he moved away from me, strode over to the curtained oval through which Norhala had gone. Dick, I cried, following him hastily, where are you going? What are you going to do? I'm going after Norhala, he answered. I'm going to have a showdown with her or know the reason why. Drake, I cried again, aghast, don't make the mistake Ventnor did. That's not the way to win through. Don't, I beg you, don't. You're wrong, he answered stubbornly. I'm going to get her. She's got to talk. He thrust out a hand to the curtains. Before he could touch them, they were parted. Out from between them slithered the black eunuch. He stood motionless, regarding us, in the ink-black eyes a red flame of hatred. I pushed myself between him and Drake. Where is your mistress, Yuruk? I asked. "The goddess has gone," he replied sullenly. "Gone?" I said suspiciously, for certainly Norhala had not passed us. "Where?" "Who shall question the goddess?" he asked. "She comes and she goes as she pleases." I translated this for Drake. "He's got to show me," he said. "Don't think I'm going to spill any beans, Goodwin, but I want to talk to her. I think I'm right. Honestly, I do." After all, I reflected, there was much in his determination to recommend it. It was the obvious thing to do unless we admitted that Norhala was superhuman, and that I would not admit. In command of forces we did not yet know, en rapport with these people of metal, sealed with that alien consciousness Ruth had described all these, yes, but still a woman of that I was certain. And surely Drake could be trusted not to repeat Ventnor's error. "Yuruk," I said, "we think you lie. We would speak to your mistress. Take us to her." "I have told you that the goddess is not here," he said. "If you do not believe, it is nothing to me. I cannot take you to her, for I do not know where she is. Is it your wish that I take you through her house?" "It is," I said. "The goddess has commanded me to serve you in all things," he bowed sardonically. "Follow." Our search was short. We stepped out into what, for want of better words, I can describe only as a central hall. It was circular and strewn with thick-piled small rugs whose hues had been softened by the alchemy of time into exquisite, shadowy echoes of color. The walls of this hall were of the same moonstone substance that had enclosed the chamber upon whose inner threshold we were. They whirled straight up to the dome in a crystalline, cylindrical cone. 4 doorways like that in which we stood pierced them. Through each of their curtainings in turn we peered. All were precisely similar in shape and proportions, radiating in a lunetted, curved-based triangle from the middle chamber, the curvature of the enclosing globe forming back wall and roof, the translucent slicings the sides, the circle of floor of the inner hall the truncating lunette. The first of these chambers was utterly bare. The one opposite held a half-dozen suits of the lacquered armor, as many wicked-looking, short and double-edged swords and long javelins. The third I judged to be the lair of Yuruk. Within it was a copper brazier, a stand of spears and a gigantic bow, a quiver full of arrows leaning beside it. The fourth room was littered with coffers great and small, of wood and of bronze, and all tightly closed. The fifth room was beyond question Norhala's bedchamber. Upon its floor the ancient rugs were thick. A low couch of carven ivory inset with gold rested a few feet from the doorway. A dozen or more of the chests were scattered about and flowing over with silken stuffs. Upon the back of 4 golden lions stood a high mirror of polished silver, and close to it, in curiously incongruous domestic array, stood a stiffly marshalled row of sandals. Upon one of the chests were heaped combs and fillets of shell and gold, and ivory studded with jewels blue and yellow and crimson. To all of these we gave but a passing glance. We sought for Norhala, and of her we found no shadow. She had gone even as the black eunuch had said, flitting unseen past Ruth, perhaps, absorbed in her watch over her brother, perhaps through some hidden opening in this room of hers. Yuruk let drop the curtains, sidled back to the first room, we after him. The 2 there had not moved. We drew the saddlebags close, propped ourselves against them. The black eunuch squatted a dozen feet away, facing us, chin upon his knees, taking us in with unblinking eyes blank of any emotion. Then he began to move slowly his tremendously long arms in easy, soothing motion, the hands running along the floor upon their talons in arcs and circles. It was curious how these hands seemed to be endowed with a volition of their own, independent of the arms upon which they swung. And now I could see only the hands, shuttling so smoothly, so rhythmically back and forth, weaving so sleepily back and forth, black hands that dripped sleep hypnotic. Hypnotic, I sprang from the lethargy closing upon me. In one quick side glance, I saw Drake's head nodding in time to the movement of the black hands. I jumped to my feet, shaking with an intensity of rage unfamiliar to me, thrust my pistol into the wrinkled face. "Damn you," I cried. "Stop that. Stop it and turn your back." The corded muscles of the arms contracted. The claws of the slithering paws drew in as though he were about to clutch me. The ebon pools of eyes were covered with a frozen film of hate. He could not have known what was this tube with which I menaced him, but its threat he certainly sensed and was afraid to meet. He squatted about, wrapped his arms around his knees, crouched with back toward us. "What's the matter?" asked Drake drowsily. "He tried to hypnotize us," I answered shortly, "and pretty nearly did." So that's what it was. He was now wide awake. I watched those hands of his and got sleepier and sleepier. "I guess we'd better tie Mr. Yuruk up." He jumped to his feet. "No," I said, restraining him. "No, he's safe enough as long as we're on the alert. I don't want to use any force on him yet. Wait until we know we can get something worthwhile by doing it." "All right," he nodded grimly. "But when the time comes, I'm telling you straight, Doc, I'm going the limit. There's something about that human spider that makes me itch to squash him slowly." "I'll have no compunction when it's worthwhile," I answered as grimly. We sank down again against the saddlebags. Drake brought out a black pipe, looked at it sorrowfully, at me appealingly. "All mine was on that pony that bolted," I answered his wistfulness. "All mine was on my beast, too," he sighed, "and I lost my pouch in that spurt from the ruins." He sighed again, clamped white teeth down upon the stem. "Of course," he said at last, "if Ventnor was right in that disembodied analysis of his, it's rather, well, terrifying, isn't it?" "It's all of that," I replied, "and considerably more." "Metal," he said, Drake mused. "Things of metal with brains of thinking crystal and their blood the lightnings. You accept that?" "So far as my own observation has gone, yes," I said. "Metallic yet mobile. Inorganic, but with all the quantities we have hitherto thought only those of the organic, and with others added. Crystalline, of course, in structure and highly complex. Activated by magnetic electric forces consciously exerted, and as much a part of their life as brain energy and nerve currents are of our human life. Animate, moving, sentient combinations of metal and electric energy." He said, "The opening of the disk from the globe and of the two blasting stars from the pyramids show the flexibility of the outer plate, would you call it? I couldn't help thinking of the armadillo after I had time to think at all." "It may be," I struggled against the conviction now strong upon me. "It may be that within that metallic shell is an organic body, something soft animal, as there is within the horny carapace of the turtle, the nacreous valves of the oyster, the shells of the crustaceans. It may be that even their inner surface is organic. No, he interrupted. If there is a body as we know a body, it must be between the outer surface and the inner, for the latter is crystal, jewel hard, impenetrable. Goodwin Ventnor's bullets hit fair. I saw them strike. They did not ricochet, they dropped dead. Like flies dashed up against a rock, and the thing was no more conscious of their striking than a rock would have been of those flies. Drake, I said, my own conviction is that these creatures are absolutely metallic, entirely inorganic, incredible, unknown forms. Let us go on that basis. I think so, too, he nodded, but I wanted you to say it first. And yet is it so incredible, Goodwin? What is the definition of vital intelligence, sentience? Haeckel's is the accepted one. Anything which can receive a stimulus, that can react to a stimulus and retains memory of a stimulus, must be called an intelligent, conscious entity. The gap between what we have long called the organic and the inorganic is steadily decreasing. Do you know of the remarkable experiments of Lilly upon various metals? Vaguely, I said. Lilly, he went on, proved that under the electric current and other exciting mediums metals exhibited practically every reaction of the human nerve and muscle. It grew weary, rested, and after resting was perceptibly stronger than before. It got what was practically indigestion, and it exhibited a peculiar but unmistakable memory. Also, he found, it could acquire disease and die. Lilly concluded that there existed a real metallic consciousness. It was Le Bon who first proved also that metal is more sensitive than man, and that its immobility is only apparent. Le Bon in Evolution of Matter, Chapter 11. Take the block of magnetic iron that stands so grey and apparently lifeless, subject it to a magnetic current lifeless. What happens? The iron block is composed of molecules which under ordinary conditions are disposed in all possible directions indifferently. But when the current passes through, there is tremendous movement in that apparently inert mass. All of the tiny particles of which it is composed turn and shift until their north poles all point more or less approximately in the direction of the magnetic force. When that happens, the block itself becomes a magnet, filled with and surrounded by a field of magnetic energy, instinct with it. Outwardly it has not moved. Actually, there has been prodigious motion. But it is not conscious motion, I objected. Ah, but how do you know? He asked. If Jacques Loeb asterisk is right, that action of the iron molecules is every bit as conscious a movement as the least and the greatest of our own. There is absolutely no difference between them. Your and my and its every movement is nothing but an involuntary and inevitable reaction to a certain stimulus. If he's right, then I'm a buttercup, but that's neither here nor there. Loeb, all he did was to restate destiny, one of humanity's oldest ideas, in the terms of tropisms, infusoria, and light. Omar Khayyam chemically reincarnated in the Rockefeller Institute. Nevertheless, those who accept his theories have to admit that there is essentially no difference between their impulses and the rush of filings toward a magnet. Equally, nevertheless, Goodwin, the iron does meet Haeckel's 3 tests. It can receive a stimulus. It does react to that stimulus, and it retains memory of it. For even after the current has ceased, it remains changed in tensile strength, conductivity, and other qualities that were modified by the passage of that current. And as time passes, this memory fades. Precisely as some human experience increases wariness, caution, which keying up of qualities remains with us after the experience has passed, and fades away in the ratio of our sensitivity plus retentiveness, divided by the time elapsing from the original experience exactly as it is in the iron. Professor Jacques Loeb of the Rockefeller Institute, New York, The Mechanistic Conception of Life. Chapter 16, Consious Metal. Granted, I acquiesced. We now come to their means of locomotion. In its simplest terms, all locomotion is progress through space against the force of gravitation. Man's walk is a series of rhythmic stumbles against this force that constantly strives to drag him down to Earth's face and keep him pressed there. Gravitation is an etheric magnetic vibration akin to the force which holds, to use your simile again, Drake, the filing against the magnet. A walk is a constant breaking of the current. Take a motion picture of a man walking and run it through the lantern rapidly, and he seems to be flying. We have none of the awkward fallings and recoveries that are the tempo of walking as we see it. I take it that the movement of these things is a conscious breaking of the gravitational current just as much as is our own movement, but by a rhythm so swift that it appears to be continuous. Doubtless, if we could so control our sight as to admit the vibrations of light slowly enough, we would see this apparently smooth motion as a series of leaps, just as we do when the motion picture operator slows down his machine sufficiently to show us walking in a series of stumbles. Very well so far, then, we have nothing in this phenomenon which the human mind cannot conceive as possible. Therefore, intellectually, we still remain masters of the phenomena, for it is only that which human thought cannot encompass which it need fear. Metallic, he said, and crystalline, and yet why not? What are we but bags of skin filled with certain substances in solution and stretched over a supporting and mobile mechanism largely made up of lime? Out of that primeval jelly which Gregory calls protobion came after untold millions of years us with our skins, our nails, and our hair. Came, too, the serpents with their scales, the birds with their feathers, the horny hide of the rhinoceros and the fairy wings of the butterfly, the shell of the crab, the gossamer loveliness of the moth, and the shimmering wonder of the mother of pearl. J. W. Gregory, FRSDSC, Professor of Geology, University of Glasgow. Is there any greater gap between any of these and the metallic? I think not. Not materially, I answered. No, but there remains consciousness. That, he said, I cannot understand. Ventnor spoke of, how did he put it, a group consciousness, operating in our sphere and in spheres above and below ours, with senses known and unknown. I got glimpses, Goodwin, but I cannot understand. We have agreed for reasons that seem sufficient to us to call these things metallic, Dick, I replied. But that does not necessarily mean that they are composed of any metal that we know. Nevertheless, being metal, they must be of crystalline structure. As Gregory has pointed out, crystals and what we call living matter had an equal start in the first essentials of life. We cannot conceive life without giving it the attribute of some sort of consciousness. Hunger cannot be anything but conscious, and there is no other stimulus to eat but hunger. The crystals eat. The extraction of power from food is conscious because it is purposeful, and there can be no purpose without consciousness. Similarly, the power to work from such derived energy is also purposeful and therefore conscious. The crystals do both, and the crystals can transmit all these abilities to their children, just as we do. For although there would seem to be no reason why they should not continue to grow to gigantic size under favorable conditions, yet they do not. They reach a size beyond which they do not develop. Instead, they bud give birth, in factor smaller ones, which increase until they reach the size of the preceding generation. And like the children of man and animals, these younger generations grow on precisely as their progenitors. Very well, then we arrive at the conception of a metallically crystalline being, which by some explosion of the force of evolution has burst from the to us familiar and apparently inert stage into these things that hold us. And is there any greater difference between the forms with which we are familiar and them than there is between us and the crawling amphibian which is our remote ancestor? Or between that and the amoeba, the little swimming stomach from which it evolved? Or the amoeba and the inert jelly of the protobian? As for what Ventnor calls a group consciousness, I would assume that he means a communal intelligence, such as that shown by the bees and the ants that, in the case of the former Metallique, calls the spirit of the hive. It is shown in their groupings just as the geometric arrangement of those groupings shows also clearly their crystalline intelligence. I submit that in their rapid coordination, either for attack or movement or work without apparent communication having passed between the units, there is nothing more remarkable than the swarming of a hive of bees, where also without apparent communication, just so many wax makers, nurses, honey-gatherers, chemists, bread makers, and all the varied specialists of the hive go with the old queen, leaving behind sufficient number of each class for the needs of the young queen. All this apportionment is effected without any means of communication that we recognize. Still, it is most obviously intelligent selection. For if it were haphazard, all the honeymakers might leave, and the hive starve, or all the chemists might go, and the food for the young bees not be properly prepared, and so on and so on. But metal, he muttered, and conscious. It's all very well, but where did that consciousness come from? And what is it? And where did they come from? And most of all, why haven't they overrun the world before this? Such development as theirs, such an evolution, presupposes eons of time long, as it took us to drag up from the lizards. What have they been doing? Why haven't they been ready to strike if Ventnor's right at humanity until now? I don't know, I answered helplessly. But evolution is not the slow, plodding process that Darwin thought. There seem to be explosions. Nature will create a new form almost in a night. Then comes the long ages of development and adjustment, and suddenly another new race appears. It might be so of these some extraordinary conditions that shaped them. Or they might have developed through the ages in spaces within the earth. There's that incredible abyss we saw that is evidently one of their highways. Or they might have dropped here upon some fragment of a broken world, found in this valley the right conditions, and developed in amazing rapidity. They're all possible theories, take your pick. Professor Svante Arrhenius's theory of propagation of life by means of minute spores carried through space. See his Worlds in the Making, W.T.G. Something's held them back and they're rushing to a climax, he whispered. Ventnor's right about that, I feel it. And what can we do? Go back to their city, I said. Go back as he ordered. I believe he knows what he's talking about, and I believe he'll be able to help us. It wasn't just a request he made, nor even an appeal, it was a command. But what can we do, just 2 men against these things? He groaned. Maybe we'll find out when we're back in the city, I answered. Well, his old reckless cheerfulness came back to him. In every crisis of this old globe, it's been up to one man to turn the trick. We're 2. And at the worst, we can only go down fighting a little before the rest of us. So, after all, whatever the hell, what the hell? For a time, we were silent. Well, he said at last, we have to go to the city in the morning. He laughed. Sounds as though we were living in the suburbs somehow, doesn't it? It can't be many hours before dawn, I said. Turn in for a while. I'll wake you when I think you've slept enough. It doesn't seem fair, he protested, but sleepily. I'm not sleepy, I told him, nor was I. But whether I was or not, I wanted to question Yuruk, uninterrupted and undisturbed. Drake stretched himself out. When his breathing showed him fast asleep indeed, I slipped over to the black eunuch and crouched, right hand close to the butt of my automatic, facing him. Chapter 17. Yuruk. Yuruk, I whispered, you love us as the wheat field loves the hail. We are as welcome to you as the death cord to the condemned. Lo, a door opened into a land of unpleasant dreams you thought sealed, and we came through. Answer my questions truthfully, and it may be that we shall return through that door. Interest welled up in the depths of the black eyes. There is a way from here, he muttered, nor does it pass through them. I can show it to you. I had not been blind to the flash of malice, of cunning, that had shot across the wrinkled face. Where does that way lead? I asked. There were those who sought us, men clad in armor with javelins and arrows. Does your way lead to them, Yuruk? For a time he hesitated, the lashless lids half closed. Yes, he said sullenly. The way leads to them, to their place. But will it not be safer for you there among your kind? I don't know that it will, I answered promptly. Those who are unlike us smote those who are like us and drove them back when they would have taken and slain us. Why is it not better to remain with them than to go to our kind who would destroy us? They would not, he said, if you gave them her. He thrust a long thumb backward toward sleeping Ruth. Cherkis would forgive much for her, and why should you not? She is only a woman. He spat in a way that made me want to kill him. Besides, he ended, have you no arts to amuse him? Cherkis, I asked. Cherkis, he whined. Is Yuruk a fool not to know that in the world without, new things have arisen since long ago we fled from Iskander into the secret valley? What have you to beguile Cherkis beyond this woman flesh? Much, I think. Go then to him unafraid. Cherkis, there was a familiar sound to that. Cherkis. Of course it was the name of Xerxes, the Persian conqueror, corrupted by time into this Cherkis. And Iskander, equally, of course, Alexander. Ventnor had been right. Yuruk, I demanded directly, is she whom you call goddess Norhala of the people of Cherkis? Long ago, he answered. Long, long ago there was trouble in their city, even in the great dwelling place of Cherkis. I fled with her who was the mother of the goddess. There were 20 of us, and we fled here by the way which I will show you." He leered cunningly. I gave no sign of interest. "She who was the mother of the goddess found favor in the sight of the ruler here," he went on. "But after a time, she grew old and ugly and withered. So he slew her like a little mound of dust. She danced and blew away after he had slain her. And also he slew others who had grown displeasing to him. He blasted me as he was blasted. He pointed to Ventnor. Then it was that, recovering, I found my crooked shoulder. The goddess was born here. She is kin to him who rules. How else could she shed the lightnings? Was not the father of Iskander the god Zeus Ammon, who came to Iskander's mother in the form of a great snake? Well, at any rate the goddess was born shedder of the lightnings even from her birth, and she is as you see her. Cleave to your kind, cleave to your kind, suddenly he shrilled. Better is it to be whipped by your brother than to be eaten by the tiger. Cleave to your kind. Look, I will show you the way to them. He sprang to his feet, clasped my wrist in one of his long hands, led me through the curtained oval into the cylindrical hall, parted the curtainings of Norhala's bedroom and pushed me within. Over the floor he slid, still holding fast to me, and pressed against the farther wall. An ovoid slice of the gem-like material slid aside, revealing a doorway. I glimpsed a path, a trail, leading into a forest pallid green beneath the one light. This way thrust itself like a black tongue into the boskage and vanished in the depths. "Follow it," he pointed. "Take those who came with you and follow it." The wrinkles upon his face writhed with his eagerness. "You will go," panted Yuruk. "You will take them and go by that path." "Not yet," I answered absently. "Not yet." And was brought abruptly to full alertness, vigilance, by the flame of rage that filled the eyes thrust so close. "Lead back," I directed curtly. He slid the door into place, turned sullenly. I followed, wondering what were the sources of the bitter hatred he so plainly bore for us, the reasons for his eagerness to be rid of us despite the commands of this woman who to him at least was goddess. And by that curious human habit of seeking for the complex when the simple answer lies close, failed to recognize that it was jealousy of us that was the root of his behavior, that he wished to be, as it would seem he had been for years, the only human thing near Norhala, failed to realize this, and with Ruth and Drake was terribly to pay for this failure. I looked down upon the pair, sleeping soundly, upon Ventnor lost still in trance. "Sit," I ordered the eunuch, "and turn your back to me." I dropped down beside Drake, my mind wrestling with the mystery, but every sense alert for movement from the black. Glibly enough, I had passed over Dick's questioning as to the consciousness of the metal people. Now, I faced it knowing it to be the very crux of these incredible phenomena, admitting, too, that despite all my special pleading, about that point swirled in my own mind the thickest mists of uncertainty, that their sense of order was immensely beyond a man's was plain. As plain was it that their knowledge of magnetic force and its manipulation were far beyond the sphere of humanity, that they had realization of beauty, this palace of Norhala's proved, and no human imagination could have conceived it, nor human hands have made its thought of beauty real. What were their senses through which their consciousness fed? 9 in number had been the sapphire ovals set within the golden zone of the disk. Clearly it came to me that these were sense organs. but 9 senses. And the great stars, how many had they? And the cubes did they open, as did globe and pyramid. Consciousness itself, after all, what is it? A secretion of the brain, the cumulative expression, wholly chemical, of the multitudes of cells that form us, the inexplicable governor of the city of the body, of which these myriads of cells are the citizens and created by them out of themselves to rule. Is it what many call the soul, or is it a finer form of matter, a self-realizing force, which uses the body as its vehicle, just as other forces use for their vestments other machines? After all, I thought, what is this conscious self of ours, the ego, but a spark of realization running continuously along the path of time within the mechanism we call the brain, making contact along that path as the electric spark at the end of a wire? Is there a sea of this conscious force which laps the shores of the farthest flung stars, that finds expression in everything man and rock, metal and flower, jewel and cloud, limited in its expression only by the limitations of that which animates, and in essence the same in all? If so, then this problem of the life of the metal people ceased to be a problem, was answered. So thinking, I became aware of increasing light, strode past Yuruk to the door and peeped out. Dawn was paling the sky. I stooped over Drake, shook him. On the instant he was awake, alert. "I only need a little sleep, Dick," I said. "When the sun is well up, call me." "Why, it's dawn," he whispered. "Goodwin, you ought not to have let me sleep so long. I feel like a damned pig." "Never mind," I said, "but watch the eunuch closely." I rolled myself up in his warm blanket, sank almost instantly into dreamless slumber. Chapter 18. Into the Pit. High was the sun when I awakened, or so I supposed, opening my eyes upon a flood of daylight. As I lay lazily, recollection rushed upon me. It was no sky into which I was gazing. It was the dome of Norhala's elfin home, and Drake had not aroused me. Why, and how long had I slept? I jumped to my feet, stared about. Ruth nor Drake nor the black eunuch was there. "Ruth," I shouted. "Drake." There was no answer. I ran to the doorway. Peering up into the white vault of the heavens, I set the time of day as close to 7. I had slept then 3 hours, more or less. Yet short as that time of slumber had been, I felt marvelously refreshed, re-energized. The effect, I was certain, of the extraordinarily tonic qualities of the atmosphere of this place. But where were the others? Where Yuruk? I heard Ruth's laughter. Some 100 yards to the left, half hidden by a screen of flowering shrubs, I saw a small meadow. Within it, a half-dozen little white goats nuzzled around her and Dick. She was milking one of them. Reassured, I drew back into the chamber, knelt over Ventnor. His condition was unchanged. My gaze fell upon the pool that had been Norhala's bath. Longingly I looked at it, then satisfying myself that the milking process was not finished, slipped off my clothes and splashed about. I had just time to get back in my clothes when through the doorway came the pair, each carrying a porcelain pannikin full of milk. There was no shadow of fear or horror on her face. It was the old Ruth who stood before me, nor was there effort in the smile she gave me. She had been washed clean in the waters of sleep. "Don't worry, Walter," she said. "I know what you're thinking, but I'm me again." Where is Yuruk? I turned to Drake brusquely to smother the sob of sheer happiness I felt rising in my throat, and at his wink and warning grimace abruptly forbore to press the question. You men pick out the things, and I'll get breakfast ready, said Ruth. Drake picked up the tea kettle and motioned me before him. About Yuruk, he whispered when he had gotten outside. I gave him a little object lesson, persuaded him to go down the line a bit, showed him my pistol, and then picked off one of Norhala's goats with it. Hated to do it, but I knew it would be good for his soul. He gave one screech and fell on his face and grovelled. Thought it was a lightning bolt, I figure. Decided I had been stealing Norhala's stuff. Yuruk, I told him, that's what you'll get, and worse, if you lay a finger on that girl inside there. And then what happened? I asked. He beat it back there. He grinned, pointing toward the forest through which ran the path the eunuch had shown me, probably hiding back of a tree. As we filled the container at the outer spring, I told him of the revelations and the offer Yuruk had made to me. "UW," he whistled. "In the Nutcracker, eh? Trouble behind us and trouble in front of us." "When do we start?" he asked as we turned back. "Right after we've eaten," I answered. "There's no use putting it off. How do you feel about it?" "Frankly, like the chief guest at a lynching party," he said. "Curious, but none too cheerful." Nor was I was filled with a fever of scientific curiosity. But I was not cheerful now. We ministered to Ventnor as well as we could, forcing open his set jaws, thrusting a thin rubber tube down past his windpipe into his gullet, and dropping through it a few ounces of the goat milk. Our own breakfasting was silent enough. We could not take Ruth with us upon our journey. That was certain. She must stay here with her brother. She would be safer in Norhala's home than where we were going, of course, and yet to leave her was most distressing. After all, I wondered, was there any need of both of us taking the journey? Would not one do just as well? Drake could stay. No use of putting all our eggs in one basket. I broached the subject. I'll go down by myself while you stay and help Ruth. You can always follow if I don't turn up in a reasonable time. His indignation at this proposal was matched only by her own. "You'll go with him, Dick Drake," she cried, "or I'll never look at or speak to you again." Good Lord, did you think for a minute I wouldn't? Pain and wrath struggled on his face. We go together, or neither of us goes. Ruth will be all right here, Goodwin. The only thing she has any cause to fear is Yuruk, and he's had his lesson. Besides, she'll have the rifles and her pistols, and she knows how to use them. What do you mean by making such a proposition as that? His indignation burst all bounds. Lamely, I tried to justify myself. "I'll be all right," said Ruth. "I'm not afraid of Yuruk, and none of these things will hurt me, not after. Her eyes fell, her lips quivered, then she faced us steadily. "Don't ask me how I know that," she said quietly. "Believe me, I do know it. I am closer to them than you two are. And if I choose, I can call upon that alien strength their master gave me. It is for you two that I fear." "No fear for us," Drake burst out hastily. "We're Norhala's little playthings. We're taboo. Take it from me, Ruth, I'd bet my head there isn't one of these things, great or small, and no matter how many, that doesn't by this time know all about us. We'll probably be received with demonstrations of interest by the populace as welcome guests. Probably we'll find a sign welcome to our city hung up over the front gate." She smiled, a trifle tremulously. "We'll come back," he said. Suddenly he leaned forward, put his hands on her shoulders. "Do you think there is anything that could keep me from coming back?" he whispered. She trembled, wide eyes searching deep into his. "Well," I broke in a bit uncomfortably, "we'd better be starting. I think as Drake does that we're taboo. Barring accident, there's no danger. And if I guess right about these things, accident is impossible. As inconceivable as the multiplication table going wrong," he laughed, straightening. And so we made ready. Our rifles would be worse than useless, we knew. Our pistols we decided to carry, as Drake put it, for comfort. Canteens filled with water, a couple of emergency rations, a few instruments, including a small spectroscope, a selection from the medical kit haul, these packed in a little haversack which he threw over his broad shoulders. I pocketed my compact but exceedingly powerful field glasses. To my poignant and everlasting regret, my camera had been upon the bolting pony, and Ventnor had long been out of films for his. We were ready for our journey. Our path led straight away, a smooth and dark grey road whose surface resembled cement packed under enormous pressure. It was all of 50 feet wide and now, in daylight, glistened faintly as though overlaid with some vitreous coating. It narrowed abruptly into a wedged way that stopped at the threshold of Norhala's door. Diminishing through the distance, it stretched straight as an arrow onward and vanished between perpendicular cliffs which formed the frowning gateway through which the night before we had passed upon the coursing cubes from the pit of the city. Here, as then, a mistiness checked the gaze. Ruth with us, we made a brief inspection of the surroundings of Norhala's house. It was set as though in the narrowest portion of an hourglass. The precipitous walls marched inward from the gateway, forming the lower half of the figure. At the back, they swung apart at a wider angle. This upper part of the hourglass was filled with a park-like forest. It was closed, perhaps 20 miles away, by a barrier of cliffs. How, I wondered, did the path which Yuruk had pointed out to me pierce them? Was it by pass or tunnel? And why was it the armored men had not found and followed it? The waste between these two mountain wedges was a valley not more than a mile wide. Norhala's house stood in its center, and it was like a garden, dotted with flowering and fragrant lilies, and here and there a tiny green meadow. The great globe of blue that was Norhala's dwelling seemed less to rest upon the ground than to emerge from it, as though its basic curvatures were hidden in the earth. What was its substance I could not tell. It was as though built of the lacquer of the gems whose colors it held. And beautiful, wondrously, incredibly beautiful it was, an immense bubble of froth of molten sapphires and turquoises. We had not time to study its beauties. A few last instructions to Ruth, and we set forth down the grey road. Hardly had we taken a few steps when there came a faint cry from her. "Dick, Dick, come here." He sprang to her, caught her hands in his. For a moment, half frightened it seemed, she considered him. "Dick," I heard her whisper. "Dick, come back safe to me." I saw his arms close about her, hers tighten around his neck. Black hair touched the silken brown curls, their lips met, clung. I turned away. In a little time he joined me. Head down, silent, he strode along beside me, utterly dejected. 100 more yards and we turned. Ruth was still standing on the threshold of the house of mystery, watching us. She waved her hands, flitted in, was hidden from us. And Drake still silent, we pushed on. The walls of the gateway were close. The sparse vegetation along the base of the cliffs had ceased. The roadway itself had merged into the smooth, bare floor of the canyon. From vertical edge to vertical edge of the rocky portal stretched a curtain of shimmering mist. As we drew nearer, we saw that this was motionless, and less like vapor of water than vapor of light. It streamed in oddly fixed lines like atoms of crystals in a still solution. Drake thrust an arm within it, waved it. The mist did not move. It seemed instead to interpenetrate the arm as though bone and flesh were spectral, without power to dislodge the shining particles from position. We passed within it side by side. Instantly I knew that whatever these veils were, they were not moisture. The air we breathed was dry, electric. I was sensible of a decided stimulation, a pleasant tingling along every nerve, a gaiety almost light-headed. We could see each other quite plainly, the rocky floor on which we trod as well. Within this vapor of light there was no ghost of sound. It was utterly empty of it. I saw Drake turn to me, his mouth open in a laugh, his lips move in speech, and, although he bent close to my ear, I heard nothing. He frowned, puzzled, and walked on. Abruptly we stepped into an opening, a pocket of clear air. Our ears were filled with a high, shrill humming as unpleasantly vibrant as the shriek of a sand blast. 6 feet to our right was the edge of the ledge on which we stood. Beyond it was a sheer drop into space, a shaft piercing down into the void and walled with the mists. But it was not that shaft that made us clutch each other. No, it was that through it uprose a colossal column of the cubes. It stood 100 feet from us. Its top was another 100 feet above the level of our ledge, and its length vanished in the depths. And its head was a gigantic spinning wheel, yards in thickness, tapering at its point of contact with the cliff wall into a diameter half, that of the side closest the column, gleaming with flashes of green flame and grinding with tremendous speed at the face of the rock. Over it, attached to the cliff, was a great visored hood of some pale yellow metal, and it was this shelter that, cutting off the vaporous light like an enormous umbrella, made the pocket of clarity in which we stood, the shaft up which sprang the pillar. All along the length of that column, as far as we could see, the myriad tiny eyes of the metal people shone out upon us, not twinkling mischievously, but grotesque as this may seem, I cannot help it wide with surprise. Only an instant longer did the great wheel spin. I saw the screaming rock melting beneath it, dropping like lava. Then, as though it had received some message, abruptly its motion now ceased. It tilted, looked down upon us. I noted that its grinding surface was studded thickly with the smaller pyramids, and that the tips of these were each capped with what seemed to be faceted gems, gleaming with the same pale yellow radiance as the shrine of the cones. The column was bending, the wheel approaching. Drake seized me by the arm, drew me swiftly back into the mists. We were shrouded in their silences. Step by step we went on, peering for the edge of the shelf, feeling in fancy that prodigious wheeled face stealing upon us, afraid to look behind lest in looking we might step too close to the unseen verge. Yard after yard we slowly covered. Suddenly the vapors thinned. We passed out of them. A chaos of sound beat about us. The clanging of 1,000,000 anvils, the clamor of 1,000,000 forges, the crashing of 100 years of thunder, the roarings of 1,000 hurricanes, the prodigious bellowings of the pit beating against us now as they had when we had flown down the long ramp into the depths of the sea of light. Instinct with unthinkable power was that clamor, the very voice of force. Stunned, nay blinded by it, we covered ears and eyes. As before, the clangor died, leaving in its wake a bewildered silence. Then that silence began to throb with a vast humming, and through that humming rang a murmur as that of a river of diamonds. We opened our eyes, felt awe grip our throats as though a hand had clutched them. Difficult, difficult almost beyond thought, is it for me now to essay to draw in words the scene before us then. For although I can set down what it was we saw, I nor any man can transmute into phrases its essence, its spirit, the intangible wonder that was its synthesis, the appallingly beautiful, soul-shaking strangeness of it, its grandeur, its fantasy, and its alien terror. The domain of the metal monster it was filled like a chalice with its will, was the visible expression of that will. We stood at the very rim of a wide ledge. We looked down into an immense pit, shaped into a perfect oval, 30 miles in length I judged, and half that as wide, and rimmed with colossal precipices. We were at the upper end of this deep valley and on the tip of its axis. I mean that it stretched longitudinally before us along the line of greatest length. 500 feet below was the pit's floor. Gone were the clouds of light that had obscured it the night before, the air crystal clear, every detail standing out with stereoscopic sharpness. First the eyes rested upon a broad band of fluorescent amethyst, ringing the entire rocky wall. It girdled the cliffs at a height of 10,000 feet, and from this flaming zone, as though it clutched them, fell the curtains of sparkling mist, the enigmatic, sound-slaying vapors. But now I saw that all of these veils were not motionless like those through which we had just passed. To the northwest, they were pulsing like the aurora, and like the aurora they were shot through with swift iridescences, spectrums, polychromatic gleamings. And always these were ordered, geometric-like immense, and flitting prismatic crystals flying swiftly to the very edges of the veils, then darting as swiftly back. From zone and veils, the gaze leaped to the incredible city, towering not 2 miles away from us. Blue-black, shining, sharply cut as though from polished steel, it reared full 5,000 feet on high. How great it was I could not tell, for the height of its precipitous walls barred the vision. The frowning facade turned toward us was, I estimated, 5 miles in length. Its colossal scarp struck the eyes like a blow. Its shadow, falling upon us, checked the heart. It was overpowering dreadful as that midnight city of Dis that Dante saw rising up from another pit. It was a metal city, mountainous. Featureless, smooth, the immense wall of it heaved heavenward. It should have been blind, that vast oblong face, but it was not blind. From it radiated alertness, vigilance. It seemed to gaze toward us as though every foot were manned with sentinels, guardians invisible to the eyes whose concentration of watchfulness was caught by some subtle hidden sense higher than sight. It was a metal city, mountainous and aware. About its base were huge openings. Through and around these portals swirled hordes of the metal people, in units, and in combinations coming and going, streaming in and out, forming as they came, and went patterns about the openings like the fretted spume of great breakers surging into, retreating from, ocean-bitten gaps in some iron-bound coast. From the immensity of the city the eyes dropped back to the pit in which it lay. Its floor was plaque-like, a great plain smooth as though turned by potter's wheel, broken by no mound nor hillock, slope nor terrace, level, horizontal, flawlessly flat. On it was no green living thing, no tree nor bush, meadow nor covert. It was alive with movement, a ferment that was as purposeful as it was mechanical, a ferment symmetrical, geometrical, supremely ordered. The surging of the metal hordes. There they moved beneath us, these enigmatic beings, in a countless host. They marched and countermarched in battalions, in regiments, in armies. Far to the south I glimpsed a company of colossal shapes like mobile, castellated and pyramidal mounts. They were circling, weaving about each other with incredible rapidity like scores of great pyramids crowned with gigantic turrets and dancing. From these turrets came vivid flashes, lightning bright on their wake the rolling echoes of faraway thunder. Out of the north sped a squadron of obelisks from whose tops flamed and flared the immense spinning wheels, appearing at this distance like fiery whirling discs. Up from their setting the metal people lifted themselves in 1,000 incredible shapes, shapes squared and globed and spiked and shifting swiftly into other thousands as incredible. I saw a mass of them draw themselves up into the likeness of a tent skyscraper high, hang so for an instant, then writhe into a monstrous chimera of a dozen towering legs that strode away like a gigantic headless and bodiless tarantula in steps 200 feet long. I watched mile-long lines of them shape and reshape into circles, into interlaced lozenges and pentagons, then lift in great columns and shoot through the air in unimaginable barrage. Through all this incessant movement, I sensed plainly purpose, knew that it was definite activity toward a definite end, caught the clear suggestion of drill, of maneuver. And when the shiftings of the metal hordes permitted, we saw that all the flat floor of the valley was stripped and checkered, stippled and tessellated with every color, patterned with enormous lozenges and squares, rhomboids and parallelograms, pentagons and hexagons and diamonds, lunettes, circles and spirals, harlequined yet harmonious, instinct with a grotesque suggestion of a superfuturism. But always this patterning was ordered, always coherent, as though it were a page on which was spelled some untranslatable other-world message. Fourth-dimensional revelations by some Euclidean deity, commandments traced by some mathematical god. Looping across the veil, emerging from the sparkling folds of the southernmost curtainings and vanishing into the gleaming veils of the easternmost, ran a broad ribbon of pale green jade, not straightly, but with manifold convolutions and flourishes. It was like a sentence in Arabic. It was margined with sapphire blue. All along its twisting course, two broad bands of jet margined the cerulean shore. It was spanned by scores of flashing crystal arches. Nor were these bridges even from that distance. I knew they were no bridges. From them came the crystalline murmurings. Jade, this stream jade. If so, then it must be in truth molten, for I caught its swift and polished rushing. It was no jade. It was in truth a river running like a writing across a patterned plain. I looked upward up to the circling peaks. They were a stupendous coronet thrusting miles deep into the dazzling sky. I raised my glasses, swept them. In color, they were an immense and variegated flower with countless multiform petals of stone. In outline, they were a ring of fortresses built by fantastic, unknown gods. Up they thrust domed and arched, spired and horned, pyramided, fanged and needled. Here were palisades of burning orange with barbicans of incandescent bronze, their aiguilles of azure rising from bastions of cinnabar red, turrets of royal purple, obelisks of indigo, titanic forts whose walls were splashed with vermilion, with citron yellows, and with rust of rubies, watchtowers of flaming scarlet. Scattered among them were the flashing emeralds of the glaciers and the immense pallid baroques of the snow fields. Like a diadem, the summits ringed the pit. Below them ran the ring of flashing amethyst with its aural mists. Between them lay the vast and patterned flat, covered with still symbol and inexplicable movement. Under their summits brooded the blue-black, metallic mass of the seeing city. Within circling walls, over plain, and from the city hovered a cosmic spirit not to be understood by man. Like an emanation of stars and space, it was yet gem-fine and gem-hard, crystalline and metallic, lapidescent and conscious. Down from the ledge where we stood fell a steep ramp, similar to that by which, in the darkness, we had descended. It dropped at an angle of at least 45 degrees. Its surface was smooth and polished. Through the mists at our back stole a shining block. It paused, seemed to perk itself, spun so that in turn each of its 6 faces took us in. I felt myself lifted upon it by multitudes of little invisible hands, saw Drake whirling up beside me. I moved toward him through the force that held us. A block swept away from the ledge, swayed for a moment. Under us, as though we were floating in air, the pit lay stretched. There was a rapid readjustment, a shifting of our 2 selves upon another surface. I looked down upon a tremendous, slender pillar of the cubes, dropping below, 500 feet to the valley's floor, a column of which the block that held us was the top. Gone was the whirling wheel that had crowned it, but I knew this for the grinding thing from which we had fled. The questing block had been its scout. As though curious to know more of us, the shape had sought us out through the mists. Its messenger had caught us, delivered us to it. The pillar leaned overbent like that shining pillar that had bridged for us, at Norhala's commands, the abyss. The floor of the valley arose to meet us. Further and further leaned the pillar. Again there was a rapid shifting of us to another surface of the crowning cube. Fast now swept up toward us the valley floor. A dizziness clouded my sight. There was a little shock, a rolling over the thing that had held us. We stood upon the floor of the pit, and breaking from the immense and prostrate shaft on whose top we had ridden downward came score upon score of the cubes. They broke from it, disintegrating it, circled about us, curiously, interestedly, twinkling at us from their deep sparkling points of eyes. Helplessly we gazed at those who circled around us. Then suddenly I felt myself lifted once more, was tossed to the surface of the nearest block. Upon it I spun while the tiny eyes searched me. Then like a human ball it tossed me to another. I caught a glimpse of Drake's tall figure drifting through the air. The play became more rapid, breathtaking. It was play, I recognized that. But it was perilous play for us. I felt myself as fragile as a doll of glass in the hands of careless children. I was tossed to a waiting cube. On the ground, not 10 feet from me, was Drake, swaying dizzily. Suddenly, the cube that held me tightened its grip, tightened it so that it drew me irresistibly flat down upon its surface. Before I dropped, Drake's body leaped toward me as though drawn by a lasso. He fell at my side. Then, pursued by scores of the things, and like some mischievous boy bearing off the spoils, the block that held us raced away, straight for an open portal. A blaze of incandescent blue flame blinded me. Again, as the dazzlement faded, I saw Drake beside me, a skeleton form. Swiftly flesh melted back upon him, clothed him. The cube stopped abruptly. The hosts of little unseen hands raised us, slid us gently over its edge, set us upright beside it, and it sped away. All about us stretched another of those vast halls in which on high burned the pale gilt suns. Between its colossal columns streamed thousands of the metal folk, no longer hurriedly, but quietly, deliberately, sedately. We were within the city even, as Ventnor had commanded. Chapter 19. The City That Was Alive. Close beside us was one of the cyclopean columns. We crept to it, crouched at its base opposite the drift of the metal people, strove, huddled there, to regain our shaken poise. Like bagatelles we felt in that tremendous place, the weird luminaries gleaming above like garlands of frozen suns, the enigmatic hosts of animate cubes and spheres and pyramids trooping past. They ranged in size from shapes yard-high to giants of 30 feet or more. They paid no heed to us, did not stop, streaming on, engrossed in whatever mysterious business was summoning them. And after a time their numbers lessened, thinned down to widely separate groups, to stragglers, then ceased. The hall was empty of them. As far as the eye could reach, the columned spaces stretched. I was conscious once more of that unusual flow of energy through every vein and nerve. "Follow the crowd," said Drake. "Do you feel just full of pep and ginger, by the way?" "I am aware of the most extraordinary vigor," I answered. "Some weird joint," he mused, looking about him. "Wonder if they have any windows. This whole place looked solid to me, what I could see of it. Wonder if we'll get up against it for air. These things don't need it, that's sure. Wonder." He broke off, staring fascinatedly at the pillar behind us. "Look here, Goodwin." There was a tremor in his voice. "What do you make of this?" I followed his pointing finger, looked at him inquiringly. "The eyes," he said impatiently. "Don't you see them? The eyes in the column." And now I saw them. The pillar was a pale metallic blue, in color a trifle darker than the metal folk. All within it were the myriads of tiny crystalline points that we had grown to know were the receptors of some strange sense of sight. But they did not sparkle as did those others. They were dull, lifeless. I touched the surface. It was smooth, cool, with none of that subtle, warm vitality that pulsed through all the things with which I had come in contact. I shook my head, realizing as I did so what a shock the incredible possibility he had suggested had given me. "No," I said. "There is a resemblance, yes, but there is no force about this stuff, no life. Besides, such a thing is utterly incredible." "They might be dormant," he suggested stubbornly. "Can you see any mark of their joining if they are the cubes?" Together we scanned the pillar minutely. The faces seemed unbroken, continuous. There was no trace of those thin and shining lines that marked the juncture of the cubes when they had clicked together to form the bridge of the abyss, or that had gleamed, cross-like, upon the back of the combined four upon which we had followed Norhala. It's a sheer impossibility. It's madness to think such a thing, Drake, I exclaimed, and wondered at my own vehemence of denial. Maybe, he shook his head doubtfully. Maybe, but well, let's be on our way. We strode on, following the direction the metal folk had gone. Clearly Drake was still doubtful. At each pillar he hesitated, scanning it closely with troubled eyes. But I, having determinedly dismissed the idea, was more interested in the fantastic lights that flooded this columned hall with their buttercup radiance. They were still and unwinking, not discs, I could see now, but globes. Great and small, they floated motionless, their rays extending rigidly and as still as the orb that shed them. Yet rigid as they were, there was nothing about either rays or orbs that suggested either hardness or the metallic. They were vaporous, soft as St. Elmo's fire, the witch lights that cling at times to the spars of ships, weird gleaming visitors from the invisible ocean of atmospheric electricity. When they disappeared, as they did frequently, it was instantaneously, completely, with a disconcerting sleight-of-hand finality. I noted, though, that when they did vanish, immediately close to where they had been other orbs swam forth with that same astonishing abruptness. Sometimes only one, larger it might be than that which had gone. Sometimes a cluster of smaller globes, their frozen, crocused rays impinging. What could they be? I wondered how fixed, and what the source of their light. Products of electromagnetic currents and born of the interpenetration of such streams flowing above us. Such a theory might account for their disappearance and reappearance, shiftings of the flows that changed the light-producing points of contact. Wireless lights. If so, here was an idea that human science might elaborate if ever we returned to. Now which way? Drake broke in upon my musing. The hall had ended. We stood before a blank wall vanishing into the soft mists, hiding the roof of the chamber. I thought we had been going along the way they went, I said in amazement. So did I, he answered. We must have circled. They never went through that unless, he hesitated. Unless what? I asked sharply. Unless it opened and let them through, he said. Have you forgotten those great ovals like cat's eyes that opened in the outer walls? He added quietly. I had forgotten. I looked again at the wall. Certainly it was smooth, lineless. In one unbroken, shining surface it rose, a facade of polished metal. Within it, the deep-set points of light were duller even than they had been in the pillars, almost indeed indistinguishable. Go on to the left, I said none too patiently, and get that absurd notion out of your head. All right, he flushed, but you don't think I'm afraid, do you? If what you're thinking were true, you'd have a right to be, I replied tartly. And I want to tell you I'd be afraid, damned afraid. For perhaps 200 paces, we skirted the base of the wall. We came abruptly to an opening, an oblong passageway fully 50 foot wide by twice as high. At its entrance, the mellow, saffron light was cut off as though by an invisible screen. The tunnel itself was filled with a dim, greyish-blue luster. For an instant, we contemplated it. I wouldn't care to be caught in there by any rush, I hesitated. "There's not much good in thinking of that now," said Drake grimly. "A few chances more or less in a joint of this kind is nothing between friends, Goodwin. Take it from me. Come on." We entered. Walls, floor, and roof were composed of the same substance as the great pillars, the wall of the outer chamber, filled like them with dimmed replicas of the twinkling eye points. "Odd that all the places in here are square," muttered Drake. "They don't seem to have used any spherical or pyramidal ideas in their building if it is a building." It was true. All was mathematically straight up and down and across. It was strange still, we had seen little as yet. There was a warmth about this passageway we trod, a difference in the air of it. The warmth grew, a dry and baking heat, but stimulative rather than oppressive. I touched the walls. The warmth did not come from them, and there was no wind. Yet as we went on, the heat increased. The passageway turned at a right angle, continuing in a corridor half its former dimensions. Far away shone a high bar of pale yellow radiance, rising like a pillar of light from floor to roof. Toward it, perforce, we trudged. Its brilliancy grew greater. A few paces away from it we stopped. The yellow luminescence streamed through a slit, not more than a foot wide in the wall. We were in a cul-de-sac, for the opening was not wide enough for either Drake or me to push through. Through it, with the light, gushed the curious heat enveloping us. Drake walked to the opening, peered through. I joined him. At first all that I could see was a space filled with the saffron lambency. Then I saw that this was splashed with tiny flashes of the jewel fires, little lances and javelin thrusts of burning emeralds and rubies, darting gem-hard flames, rose scarlet and pale sapphire, quick flares of violet. Into my sight through the iris, crocus mist, swam the radiant body of Norhala. She stood naked, clad only in the veils of her hair that glowed now like spun silk of molten copper, her strange eyes wide and smiling, the galaxies of tiny stars sparkling through their grey depths. And all about her swirled a countless host of the little things. From them came the gem fires piercing the aureate mists. They played and frolicked about her in scores of swiftly forming, swiftly changing, goblin shapes. They circled her feet in shining, elfin rings, then opening into flaming discs and stars, shot up and spun about the white miracle of her body in great girdles of multicolored living fires. Mingled with disc and star were tiny crosses gleaming with sullen, deep crimsons and smoky orange. A flash of blue incandescence and a slender pillared shape leaped from the floor, became a coronet, a whirling, flashing halo toward which streamed up the flaming tendrillings of her tresses. Other halos circled her arms and breasts. They spun like bracelets about the outstretched arms. Then, like a swiftly rushing wave, a host of the little things thrust themselves up, covered her, hid her in a coruscating cloud. I saw an exquisite arm thrust itself from their clinging, wave gaily, saw her glorious head emerge from the incredible, the seething draperies of living jewels. I heard her laughter, sweet and golden and far away. Goddess of the inexplicable, Madonna of the metal babes, the nursery of the metal people. Norhala was gone, blotted out from our sight. Gone too were the bar of light and the chamber into which we had been peering. We stared at a smooth, blank wall, with that same ensorcelled swiftness, The wall had closed even as we had stared through it, closed so quickly that we had not seen its motion. I gripped Drake, shrank with him into the farthest corner, for on the other side of us the wall was opening. First it was only a crack, then rapidly it widened. There stretched another passageway, luminous and long. Far down it we glimpsed movement. Closer that movement came, grew plainer. Out of the mistily luminous distances, three abreast, and filling the corridor from side to side, raced upon us a company of the great spheres. Back we cowered from their approach, back and back, arms outstretched, pressing against the barrier, flattening ourselves against the shock of the destroying impact menacing. "It's all up," muttered Drake. "No place to run. They're bound to smash us. Stick close, Doc. Get back to Ruth. Maybe I can stop them." Before I could check him, he had leaped straight in the path of the rushing globes, now a scant 2 yards away. The globes stopped, halted a few feet from him. They seemed to contemplate us, astonished. They turned upon themselves as though consulting. Slowly they advanced. We were pushed forward and lifted gently. Then, as we hung suspended, held by that force which always I can liken only to myriads of tiny invisible hands, the shining arcs of their backs undulated beneath us. Their files swung around the corner and marched down the passage by which we had come from the immense hall. And when the last rank had passed from under us, we were dropped softly to our feet, stood swaying in their wake. A curious frenzy of helpless indignation shook me, a rage of humiliation obscuring all gratitude I should have felt for our escape. Drake's eyes blazed wrath. "The insolent devils!" He raised clenched fists. "The insolent, domineering devils!" We stared after them. Was the passage growing narrower, closing? Even as I gazed, I saw it shrink, saw its walls slide silently toward each other. I pushed Drake into the newly opened way and sprang after him. Behind us was an unbroken wall, covering all that space in which, but a moment before, we had stood. Is it to be wondered that a panic seized us, that we began to run crazily down the alley that still lay open before us, casting over our shoulders quick, fearful glances to see whether that inexorable, dreadful closing was continuing, threatening to crush us between these walls like flies in a vice of steel? But they did not close. Unbroken, silent, the way stretched before us and behind us. At last, gasping, avoiding each other's gaze, we paused. And at that very moment of pause, a deeper tremor shook me, a trembling of the very foundations of life, the shuddering of one who faces the inconceivable, knowing at last that the inconceivable is. For abruptly, walls and floor and roof broke forth into countless twinklings, as though a film had been withdrawn from them, as though they had awakened from slumber. Myriads of little points of light shone forth upon us from the pale blue surfaces, lights that considered us, measured us, mocked us. The little points of living light that were the eyes of the metal people. This was no corridor cut through inert matter by mechanic art. Its opening had been caused by no hidden mechanisms. It was a living thing, walled and floored and roofed by the living bodies of the metal people themselves. Its opening, as had been the closing of that other passage, was the conscious, coordinate, and voluntary action of the things that formed these mighty walls. An action that obeyed, was directed by, the incredibly gigantic, communistic will which, like the spirit of the hive, the soul of the formicary, animated every unit of them. A greater realization swept us. If this were true, then those pillars in the vast hall, its towering walls, all this city was one living thing, built of the animate bodies of countless millions, tons upon countless tons of them, shaping a gigantic pile of which every atom was sentient, mobile, intelligent. A metal monster. Now I knew why it was that its frowning facade had seemed to watch us argoside, as the things had tossed us toward it. It had watched us. That flood of watchfulness pulsing about us had been actual concentration of regard, of untold billions of tiny eyes of the living block which formed the city's cliff. A city that saw, a city that was alive. No secret mechanism, then back darted my mind to that first terror had closed the wall, shutting from our sight Norhala at play with the little things. None had opened the way for, had closed the way behind, the coursing spheres. It had been done by the conscious action of the conscious things of whose living bodies was built this whole tremendous thinking pile. I think that for a moment we both went a little mad as that staggering truth came to us. I know we started to run once more, side by side, gripping like frightened children each other's hands. Then Drake stopped. "By all the hell of this place," he said solemnly, "I'll run no more. After all, we are men. If they kill us, they kill us. But by the God who made me, I'll run from them no more. I'll die standing." His courage steadied me. Defiantly we marched on. Up from below us, down from the roof, out from the walls of our way, the hosts of eyes gleamed and twinkled upon us. "Who could have believed it?" he muttered, half to himself. "A living city of them, a living nest of them, a prodigious living nest of metal." A nest! I caught the word. What did it suggest? That was it, the nest of the army ants, the city of the army ants that Beebe had studied in the South American jungles and once described to me. After all, was this more wonderful, more unbelievable than that the city of ants which was formed by their living bodies, precisely as this was of the bodies of the cubes? How had Beebe phrased it? The home, the nest, the hearth, the nursery, the bridal suite, the kitchen, the bed and board of the army ants, built of and occupied by those blind and deaf and savage little insects which by the guidance of smell alone carried on the most intricate operations, the most complex activities. Nothing here was stranger than that. I reflected, if once one could rid the mind of the paralyzing influence of the shapes of the metal things. Whence came the stimuli that moved them, the stimuli to which they reacted? William Beebe, Atlantic Monthly, October 1919. Well then, whence and how came the orders to which the ants responded, that bade them open this corridor in their nest, close that, form this chamber, fill that one? Was one more mysterious than the other? Breaking into my current of thoughts came consciousness that I was moving with increased speed, that my body was fast growing lighter. Simultaneously with this recognition, I felt myself lifted from the floor of the corridor and levitated with considerable rapidity forward. Looking down, I saw that floor several feet below me. Drake's arm wound itself around my shoulder. "Closing up behind us," he muttered. "They're putting us out." It was, indeed, as though the passageway had wearied of our deliberate progress, had decided to give us a lift. Rearward it was shutting. I noted with interest how accurately this motion kept pace with our own speed, and how fluidly the walls seemed to run together. Our movement became accelerated. It was as though we floated buoyantly, weightless, upon some swift stream. The sensation was curiously pleasant, languorous. What was that word Ruth had used? Elemental and free. The supporting force seemed to flow equally from walls and floor, to reach down to us from the roof. It was slumbrously even and effortless. I saw that in advance of us the living corridor was opening even as behind us it was closing. All around us, the little eye points twinkled and laughed. There was no danger here, there could be none. Deeper and deeper dropped my mind into the depths of that alien tranquility. Faster and faster we floated onward. Abruptly, ahead of us shone a blaze of daylight. We passed into it. The force holding us withdrew its grip. I felt solidity beneath my feet, stood and leaned back against a smooth wall. The corridor had ended and had shut us out from itself. "Bounced!" exclaimed Drake. And incongruous, flippant, colloquial as was that word, I know none that would better describe my own feelings. We were bounced out upon a turret jutting from the barrier, and before us lay spread the most amazing, the most extraordinary, fantastic scene upon which, I think, the vision of man has rested since the advent of time. Chapter 20. Vampires of the Sun. It was a crater. A half-mile on high and all of 2,000 feet across ran the circular lip of its vast rim. Above it was a circle of white and glaring sky in whose center flamed the sun. And instantly, before my vision could grasp a tithe of that panorama, I knew that this place was the very heart of the city, its vital ganglion, its soul. Around the crater lip were poised thousands of concave discs, vernal green, enormous. They were like a border of gigantic, upthrust shields, and within each, emblazoned like a shield's device, was a blinding flower of flame, the reflected, dilated face of the sun. Below this diadem hung, pendant, clusters of other discs, swarmed like the globular hiving of the constellation Hercules' captured stars, and each of these prisoned the image of our sun. 100 feet below us was the crater floor. Up from it thrust a mountainous forest of the pallidly radiant cones, bristling, prodigious. Tier upon tier, thicket upon thicket, phalanx upon phalanx they climbed. Up and up, pyramidically, they flung their spiked hosts. They drew together 2,000 feet above us, clustering close about the foot of a single huge spire, which thrust itself skyward above them. The crest of this spire was truncated. From its shorn tip radiated scores of long and slender spokes, holding in place 1,000 feet wide wheel of wan green discs whose concave surfaces, unlike those smooth ones girding the crater, were curiously faceted. This amazing structure rested upon a myriad-footed base of crystal, even as had that other cornute fantasy beside which we had met the great disk. But it was in size to that as Leviathan to a minnow. From it streamed the same baffling suggestion of invincible force transmuted into matter, energy coalesced into the tangible, power made concentrate in the vestments of substance. Halfway between crater lip and floor began the hordes of the metal people. In colossal, animate chevaux-de-frise of 100-foot girders, they thrust themselves out from the curving walls, I knew, as alive as they. From these Brobdingnagian beams they swung in ropes and cluster spheres and cubes, studded as thickly with the pyramids as ever Titan's mace with spikes. Group after bizarre group they dropped, pendulous. Coppices of slender columns of thistled globes sprang up to meet the festooned joists. Between the girders, they draped themselves in long, stellated garlands, grouped themselves in innumerable, kaleidoscopic patterns. They clicked into place around the golden turret in which we crouched. In fantastic arises, they swayed in front of us now hiding by, now revealing through their quicksilver interweavings the mounts of the cones. And steadily those flowing in below added to their multitudes, gliding up cable and pillar, building out still further the living girders, stringing themselves upon living festoon and living garland, weaving in among them, changing their shapes, rewriting their symbols. They swung and threaded swiftly, in shifting arabesque, in Gothic traceries, in lace-like fantasies, utterly bizarre, unutterably beautiful, crystalline, geometric always. Abruptly their movement ceased so abruptly that the stoppage of all the ordered turmoil had the quality of appalling silence. An unimaginable tapestry, bedight with incredible broidery, the metal people draped the vast cup, pillared it as though it were a temple, garnished it with their bodies as though it were a shrine. Across the floor toward the cones glided a palely lustrous sphere, in shape only a globe like all its kind, yet it was invested with power. It radiated power as a star does light, was clothed in unseen garments of supernal force. In its wake drifted 2 great pyramids, after them 10 spheres but little smaller than the shape which led. "The Metal Emperor," breathed Drake. On they swept until they reached the base of the cones. They paused at the edge of the crystal tabling. They turned. There was a flashing as of a meteor bursting. The globe had opened into that splendor of jewel fires before which had floated Norhala and Ruth. I saw again the luminous ovals of sapphire, studding its golden zone, the mystic rose of pulsing petal flame, the still core of incandescent ruby that was the heart of that rose. Strangely, I felt my own heart veer toward this thing, bowing before its beauty and its strength, almost worshipping. A shock of revulsion went through me. I shot a quick, half-frightened glance at Drake. He was crouching dangerously close to the lip of the ledge, hands clasped and knuckles white with the intensity of his grip, eyes rapt, staring upon the verge of worship even as I had been. "Drake," I thrust my elbow into his side brutally. "None of that. Remember you're human. Guard yourself, man, guard yourself." "What?" he muttered, then abruptly, "How did you know?" "I felt it myself," I answered. "For God's sake, Dick, hold fast to yourself. Remember Ruth." He shook his head violently as though to be rid of some clinging, cloying thing. "I'll not forget again," he said. He huddled down once more close to the edge of the shelf, peering over. No one of the metal people had moved. The silence, the stillness, was unbroken. Now the flanking pyramids shot forth into twin stars, blazing with violet luminescences, and one by one after them, the 10 lesser spheres expanded into flaming orbs. Beautiful they were, but far less glorious than that disk of whom they were the counselors, ministers. What? Still there was no movement among all the arrest. girded, pillared hosts. There came a little wailing. Far away it was and far, nearer it drew. Was that a tremor that passed through the crowded crater, a quick pulse of eagerness? Hungry, whispered Drake. They're hungry. Closer was the wailing. Again that faint tremor quivered over the place, and now I caught it a quick and avid pulsing. Hungry, whispered Drake again, like a lot of lions, with the keeper coming along with meat. The wailing was below us. I felt, not a quiver this time, but an unmistakable shock pass through the horde. It throbbed and passed. Into the field of our vision, up to the flaming disk, rushed an immense cube. Thrice the height of a tall man, as I think I have noted before when it unfolded its radiance, was that shape of mingled beauty and power I call the Metal Emperor. Yet this thing eclipsed it, black, uncompromising, in some indefinable way brutal. Its square bulk blotted out the disk's effulgence, shrouded it, and a shadow seemed to fall upon the crater. The violet fires of the flanking stars pulsed out watchfully, threateningly. For only an instant, the darkening block loomed against the disk, blackened it. There came another meteor burst of light. Where the cube had been was now a tremendous, fiery cross inverted. Its upper arm arose to twice the length either of its horizontals or the square that was its foot. In its opening it must have turned, for its face was toward us and away from the cones. Its body hid the disk, and almost all the surfaces of the two watchful stars. 80 feet at least in height, this cruciform shape stood. It flamed and flickered with angry, smoky crimsons and scarlets, with sullen orange glowings and glitterings of sulphurous yellows. Within its fires were none of those leaping, multicolored glories that were the Metal Emperor's, no trace of the pulsing, mystic rose, no shadow of jubilant sapphire, no purple royal, no tender, merciful greens nor gracious opalescences, nothing even of the blasting violet of the stars. All angry, smoky reds and ochres, the cross blazed forth, and in its lurid glowings was something sinister, something real, something cruel, something nearer to earth, closer to man. The keeper of the cones and the Metal Emperor, muttered Drake. I begin to get it, yes, I begin to get Ventnor. Once more the pulse, the avid throbbing, shook the crater, and as swiftly in its wake rushed back the stillness, the silence. The keeper turned. I saw its palely lustrous blue metallic back. I drew out my little field glasses, focused them. The cross slipped sidewise past the disk, its courtiers, its stellated guardians. As it went by they swung about with it, ever facing it. And now at last was clear a thing that had puzzled greatly, the mechanism of that opening process by which sphere became oval disk, pyramid a four-pointed star. And as I had glimpsed in the play of the little things about Norhala, could see now so plainly in the keeper, the blocks took this inverted cruciform shape. The metal people were hollow metal boxes. In their enclosing sides dwelt all their vitality, their powers themselves. And those sides were everything that they were. Folded, the oval disk became the sphere, the 4 points of the star, the square from which those points radiated. Shutting became the pyramid. The 6 faces of the cubes were when opened the inverted cross. Nor were these flexible, mobile walls massive. They were indeed, considering the apparent mass of the metal folk, most astonishingly fragile. Those of the keeper, despite its 80 feet of height, could not have been more than a yard in thickness. At the edges I thought I could see groovings, noted the same appearances at the outlines of the stars. Seen sidewise, the body of the metal emperor showed as a convexity, its surface smooth, with a suggestion of transparency. The keeper was bending, its oblong upper plane dropping forward as though upon a hinge. Lower and lower this flange bent in a grotesque, terrifying obeisance, a horrible mockery of reverence. Was this mountain of cones then actually a shrine and idol of the metal people their god? The oblong that was the upper half of the cruciform shape extended now at right angles to the horizontal arms. It hovered, a rectangle 40 feet long, as many feet over the floor at the base of the crystal pedestal. It bent again, this time from the hinge that held the outstretched arms to the base. And now it was a huge, truncated cross, a T-shaped figure, hovering only 20 feet above the pave. Down from the keeper writhed and flicked a tangle of tentacles, serpentine, whip-like. Silvery white, they were dyed with the scarlet and orange flaming of the surface now hidden from my eyes, reflected those sullen and angry gleamings. Vermicious, coiling, they seemed to drop from every inch of the overhanging plains. Something there was beneath them, something like an immense and luminous tablet. The tentacles were moving over it, pressing here, thrusting there, turning, pushing, manipulating. A shuddering passed through the crowding cones. I saw the tremor shake their bristling hosts, oscillate the great spire, set the faceted discs quivering. The trembling grew, a vibration in every separate cone that became even more rapid. There was a faint, curiously oppressive humming like the distant echo of a tempest in chaos. Faster, ever faster grew the vibration. Now the sharp outlines of the cones were dissolving. And now they were gone. The mount of the cones had become a mighty pyramid of pale green radiance, one tremendous, pallid flame, of which the spire was the tongue. Out from the disked wheel at its shorn tip gushed a flood of light that gathered itself from the leaping radiance below it. The tentacles of the keeper moved more swiftly over the enigmatic tablet, writhing cloudily, confusedly rapid. The faceted discs wavered, turned upward. The wheel began to whirl faster. Up from that flaming circle, out into the sky leaped a thick, pale green column of intensest light. With prodigious speed, as compact as water concentrate, it struck straight out toward the face of the sun. It thrust up with the speed of light, the speed of light. A thought came to me. Incredible, I believed it even as I reacted to it. My pulse is uniformly 70 to the minute. I sought my wrist, found the artery, made allowance for its possible acceleration, began to count. "What's the matter?" asked Drake. "Take my glasses," I muttered, trying to keep up while speaking my tally. "Matches in my pocket, smoke the lenses. I want to look at sun." With a look of stupefied amazement which, at another time, I would have found laughable, he obeyed. "Hold them to my eyes," I ordered. 3 minutes had gone by. There it was, that for which I sought. Clear through the darkened lenses, I could see the sun spot, high up on the northernmost limb of the sun. An unimaginable cyclone of incandescent gases, an unthinkably huge dynamo pouring its floods of electromagnetism upon all the circling planets. That solar crater which we now know was, when at its maximum, all of 150,000 miles across. The great sun spot of the summer of 1919, the most enormous ever recorded by astronomical science. 5 minutes had gone by. Common sense whispered to me. There was no use keeping my eyes fixed to the glasses. Even if that thought were true, even if that pillar of radiance were a messenger, an earth-hurled bolt flying to the sun through atmosphere and outer space with the speed of light, even if it were this stupendous creation of these things, still between 8 and 9 minutes must elapse before it could reach the orb. And as many minutes must go by before the image of whatever its impact might produce upon the sun could pass back over the bridge of light, spanning the 90 millions of miles between it and us. And after all, did not that hypothesis belong to the utterly impossible? Even were it so, what was it that the metal monster expected to follow? This radiant shaft, colossal as it was to us, was infinitesimal compared to the target at which it was aimed. What possible effect could that spear have upon the solar forces? And yet a gnat's bite can drive an elephant mad, and nature's balance is delicate, and what great happenings may follow the slightest disturbance of her infinitely sensitive, her complex equilibrium. It might be, it might be. 8 minutes had passed. "Take the glasses," I bade Drake. "Look up at the sun, spot the big one." "I see it." He had obeyed me. What of it? 9 minutes. The shaft, if I were right, had by now touched the sun. What was to follow? "I don't get you at all," said Drake, and lowered the glasses. 10 minutes. "What's happening? Look at the cones. Look at the Emperor," gasped Drake. I peered down, then almost forgot to count. The pyramidal flame that had been the mount of cones was shrunken. The pillar of radiance had not lessened, but the mechanism that was its source had retreated whole yards within the field of its crystal base. And the metal emperor, dulled and faint were his fires, dimmed his splendors, and fainter still were the violet luminescences of the watching stars, the shimmering livery of his court. The keeper of the cones, were not its outstretched planes hovering lower and lower over the gleaming tablet, its tentacles moving aimlessly, feebly, wearily? I had a sense of force being withdrawn from all about me. It was as though all the city were being drained of life, as though vitality were being sucked from it to feed this pyramid of radiance, drained from it to forge the thrusting spear piercing sunward. The metal people seemed to hang limply inert. The living girders seemed to sag, the living columns to bend, to droop and to sway. 12 minutes. With a nerve-wracking crash, one of the laden beams fell, dragging down with it others, bending, shattering in its fall a thicket of the horned columns. Behind us, the sparkling eyes of the wall were dimmed, vacant, dying. Something of that hellish loneliness, that demoniac desire for immolation that had assailed us in the haunted hollow of the ruins began to creep over me. The crowded crater was fainting. The life was going out of the city, its magnetic life, draining into the shaft of green fire. Duller grew the metal emperor's glories. 14 minutes. "Goodwin," cried Drake, "the life's going out of these things, going out with that ray they're shooting." 15 minutes. I watched the tentacles of the keeper grope over the tablet, Abruptly, the flaming pyramid darkened, went out. The radiant pillar hurtled upward like a thunderbolt, vanished in space. Before us stood the mount of cones, shrunken to a sixth of its former size. 16 minutes. All about the crater lip the ringed shields tilted, thrust themselves on high, as though behind each was an eager lifting arm. Below them, the hived clusters of discs changed from globules into wide coronets. 17 minutes. I dropped my wrist, seized the glasses from Drake, raised them to the sun. For a moment I saw nothing then. A tiny spot of white incandescence shone forth at the lower edge of the great spot. It grew into a point of radiance, dazzling even through the shadowed lenses. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. It was still there, larger blazing with an ever-increasing and intolerable intensity. I handed the glasses to Drake, silently. "I see it," he muttered. "I see it. And that did it, that. Goodwin." There was panic in his cry. "Goodwin, the spot. It's widening, it's widening." I snatched the glasses from him. I caught again the dazzling flashing. But whether Drake had seen the spot widen, change to this day, I do not know. To me it seemed unchanged, and yet perhaps it was not. It may be that under that finger of force, that spear of light, that wound in the side of our sun had opened further. That the sun had winced. I do not to this day know. But whether it had or not, still shone the intolerably brilliant light. And miracle enough that was for me. 20 minutes subconsciously. I had gone on counting 20 minutes. About the cratered girdle of the upthrust shields, a glimmering mistiness was gathering, a translucent mist, beryl pale and beryl clear. In a heartbeat it had thickened into a vast and vaporous ring, through whose swarms of corpuscles the sun's reflected image upon each disk shone clear as though seen through clouds of transparent atoms of aquamarine. Again the filaments of the keeper moved feebly, as one of the hosts of circling shields shifted downward. Brilliant, ever more brilliant, waxed the fast-thickening mists. Abruptly, and again as one, the discs began to revolve. From every concave surface, from the surfaces of the huge circlets below them, flashed out a stream of green fire, green as the fire of green life itself. Corpuscular, spun of uncounted rushing, dazzling irons the great rays struck across, impinged upon the 1,000-foot wheel that crowned the cones, set it whirling. Over it I saw form a limpid cloud of the brilliant vapors. Whence came these sparkling nebulosities, these mists of light? It was as though the clustered, spinning discs reached into the shadowless air, sucked from it some unseen, rhythmic energy, and transformed it into this visible, coruscating flood. For now it was a flood. Down from the immense wheel came pouring cataracts of green fires. They cascaded over the cones, deluged them, engulfed them. Beneath that radiant inundation, the cones grew. Perceptibly, their volume increased as though they gorged themselves upon the light. Now it was as though the corpuscles flew to them, coalesced, and built themselves into the structure. Out and further out upon the base of crystal they crept, and higher soared their tips, thrusting, ever thrusting upward toward the whirling wheel that fed them. Now from the keeper's planes writhed the keeper's tangle of tentacles, uncoiling eagerly, avidly, through the 20 feet of space between their source and the enigmatic mechanism they manipulated. The crater's disks tilted downward. Into the vast hollow shot their jets of green radiance, drenching the metal hordes, splashing from the polished walls wherever the metal hordes had left those living walls exposed. All about us was a trembling, an accelerating pulse of life. Colossal, rhythmic, ever quicker, ever more powerfully that pulse throbbed a prodigious vibration, monstrously alive. "Feeding," whispered Drake. "Feeding, feeding on the sun." Faster danced the radiant beams. The crater was a cauldron of green fires through which the conical rays angled and interwove, crossed and mingled. And where they mingled, where they crossed, flamed out suddenly immense rayless orbs, palpitant for an instant, then dissolving in spiraling, feathery spray of pallid emerald incandescences. Stronger and stronger beat the pulse of returning life. A jetting stream struck squarely upon the metal emperor. Out blazed his splendors jubilant. His golden zodiac, no longer tarnished and dull, ran with sun flames. The wondrous rose was a racing, lambent miracle. Up snapped the keeper, towered behind him, all flickering scarlets and leaping yellows no longer wrathful or sullen. The place dripped radiance, was filling like a chrism with radiance. Us too, the sparkling mists bathed. I was conscious of a curiously wild exhilaration, a quickening of the pulse, an abnormally rapid breathing. I stooped to touch Drake. Sparks leaped from my outstretched fingers, great green sparks that crackled as they impacted upon him. He gave them no heed, but stared with fascinated eyes upon the crater. Now from every side broke a tempest of gem fires. From every girder and column, from every arras, pendant and looping, burst diamond glitterings, ruby luminescences, lanced flames of molten emerald and sapphires, flashings of amethyst and opal, meteoric iridescences, dazzling spectrums. The hollow was a cave of some Aladdin of the Titans, ablaze with enchanted hordes. It was a place of gems ensorcelled, gems in which imprisoned hosts of the jinns of light beat sparkling against their crystal walls to escape. I thrust the fantasies from me. Fantastic enough was this reality globe and pyramid and cube of the metal people opening wide, bathing in, drinking from the radiant maelstrom that faster and ever faster swirled about them. Feeding, it was Drake's awed voice, feeding on the sun. The circling shields were raising themselves, lifting themselves higher above the crater lip. Into the crowded cylinder came now only the rays from the high circlets, the streams from the huge wheel above the still growing cones. Up and up the shields rose, but by what mechanism raised I could not see. Their motion ceased. In all their thousands they turned. Over the city's top and out into the oval valley they poured their torrents of light, flooding it, deluging it even as they had this pit that was the city's heart, feeding, I knew, those other metal hordes without. And as though in answer, sweeping down upon us through the circles of open sky, a clamour poured. "If we'd but known," Drake's voice came to me, thin and unreal through the tumult. "It's what Ventnor meant. If we had got down there when they were so weak, if we could have handled the keeper, we could have smashed that plate that works the cones. We could have killed them." "There are other cones," I cried back to him. "No," he shook his head. "This is the master machine. It's what Ventnor meant when he said to strike through the sun, and we've lost the chance." Louder grew the hurricane without, and now within began its mate. Through the mists flashed linked tempests of lightnings, bolt upon javelin bolt, and ever more thickly, lightnings green as the mists themselves, lightning bolts of destroying violets, searing scarlets, tearing chains of withering yellows, globes of exploding multicolored electric incandescences. The crater was threaded with the lightnings of the metal people, was broidered with them, was a pit woven with vast and changing patterns of electric flame. What was it that Drake had said? That if but we could have known, we could have destroyed, these things destroyed them. Things that could thrust their will and power up through 90 million miles of space and suck from the sun the honey of power. Drain it and hive it within these great mountains of the cones. Destroy things that could feed their own life into a machine to draw back from the sun, a greater life things that could forge of their strength a spear which, piercing the side of the sun, sent gushing back upon them a tenfold, nay, a thousandfold strength. Destroy this city that was one vast and living dynamo feeding upon the magnetic life of earth and sun. The clamour had grown stupendous, destroying like armoured gods, roaring at sword play in 100 Valhallas, like the war drums of battling universe, like the smitings of warring suns. And all the city was throbbing, beating with a gigantic pulse of life, was fed and drunken with life. I felt that pulsing become my own. I echoed to it, throbbed in unison. I saw Drake outlined in flame, that around me a radiant nimbus was growing. I thought I saw Norhala floating, clothed in shouting, flailing fires. I strove to call out to her. By me slipped the body of Drake, lay flaming at my feet upon the narrow ledge. There was a roaring within my head louder, far louder, than that which beat against my ears. Something was drawing me forth, drawing me out of my body into unimaginable depths of blackness. Something was hurling me out into those cold depths of space that alone could darken the fires that encircled me, the fires of which I was becoming a part. I felt myself leap outward, and outward into oblivion. Chapter 21. Phantasmagoria Metallique. Wearily I opened my eyes. Stiffly, painfully I stirred. High above me was the tremendous circle of sky, ringed with the hosts of feeding shields. But the shields were now wanly gleaming, and the sky was the sky of night. Night, how long had I lain here, and where was Drake? I struggled to rise. Steady, old man, his voice came from beside me. Steady and quiet. How are you feeling? Badly battered, I groaned. What happened? We weren't used to the show, he said. We got all fed up at the orgy. Too much magnetism. We had a sudden and violent attack of electrical indigestion. Look ahead of you. Gingerly I turned. I had been lying, I now saw, head toward and prone at the base of one of the crater's walls. As my gaze swept away, I noted, with a curious relief, that the tiny eye points were no longer sparkling with their enigmatic life, that they were dulled and dim once more. Before me, glimmering pallidly, bristled the mount of the cones. Around its crystal base glittered immense egg-shaped diamond incandescences. They were both rayless and strangely lightless. They threw no shadows, nor did their lambency lessen the dimness. Beside each of these curious luminosities stood one of the sullen-fired, cruciform shapes, the things that now I knew for the opened cubes. They were smaller than the keeper, indeed less than half his height. They were ranged in an almost unbroken crescent around the visible arc of the immense pedestal, and now I saw that the lights were a few feet closer to that pedestal than they. Egg-shaped, as I have said, the wider end was undermost, resting in a broad cup upheld by a slender pedicle silvery grey and metallic. "They're building out the base," whispered Drake. "The cones got so big they have to give them more room." "Magnetism," I whispered in return. Electricity they drew down from the sun's spot, and it was more than that. I saw the cones grow under it. It fed them as it fed the hordes, but the cones grew. It was as though the shields and the cones turned pure energy into substance. "And if we hadn't been pretty thoroughly magnetized to start with, it would have done for us," he said. We watched the operation going on in front of us. The cross shapes had bent, hinging above the transverse arms. They bowed in absolute unison as at some signal. Down from the horizontal plane of each whipped the long and writhing tentacles. At the foot of every one I could now perceive a heap of some faintly glistening material. The tendrils coiled among this, then drew up something that looked like a thick rod of crystal. The bent planes straightened. Simultaneously, they thrust the crystalline bars toward the incandescences. There came a curious, brittle hissing. The ends of the rods began to dissolve into dazzling diamond rain, atomically minute, that passing through the egg-shaped lights poured upon the periphery of the pedestal. Rapidly, the bars melted. Heat there must be in these lights, terrific heat, yet the keeper's workers seemed impervious to it. As the ends of the bars radiated into the annealing mist, I saw the tentacles creep closer and ever closer to the rayless flame through which the mist flew. And at the last, as the ultimate atoms drove through, the holding tendrils were thrust almost within it, touched it, certainly. A score of times they repeated this process while we watched. Unaware of us they seemed, or if aware, then indifferent. More rapid became their movements, the glassy ingots streaming through the floating braziers with hardly a pause in their passing. Abruptly, as though switched, the incandescences lessened into candle points. Instantly, as at a signal, the crescent of crosses closed into a crescent of cubes. Motionless they stood, huge blocks blackened against the dim glowing of the cone's sentient monoliths, a druid curve, an arc of a metal Stonehenge. And as at dusk and dawn the great menhirs of Stonehenge fill with a mysterious, granitic life, seem to be praying priests of stone, so about these gathered hierophantic illusion. They quivered, the slender pedicles cupping, the waned lights swayed. The lights lifted and soared upright to their backs. 2 by 2, with measured pace, solemnly the cubes glided off into the encircling darkness. As they swept away, there streamed behind them other scores, not until then visible to us, joining pair by pair from hidden arcs. Into the secret shadows they flowed, 2 by 2, each bearing over it the slim shaft holding the serene flame. Grotesquely were they like a column of monks marching with dimmed flambeau of their worship. Angled metal monks of some god of metal, carrying tapers of electric fire, withdrawing slowly from a holy of holies, whose metallically divine occupant knew nothing of man nor cared to know. Grotesque, yes, but would that I had the power to crystallize in words the underlying, alien terror, every movement of the metal monster when disintegrate, its every manifestation when combined, evoked. the incredulous, amazed lurking always close behind the threshold of the mind, the never-lifting, thin-shuddering shadow. Smaller, dimmer waned the lights, they were gone. We crouched motionless. Nothing stirred. There was no sound. Without speaking, we arose, crept together over the smooth floor toward the cones. As we crossed, I saw that the pave, like the walls, was built of the bodies of the metal people. And like the walls, they were dormant, filmed eyes oblivious to our passing. Closer, we crept where only a scant score of rods from that colossal mechanism. I noted that the crystal foundation was set low, was not more than 4 feet above the floor. The sturdy, dwarfed pilasters supporting it thrust up in crowded copses, merging through distance into apparent solidity. Now, too, I realized, as I had not when looking down from above, how stupendous the structure rising from the crystal foundation was. I began to wonder how so thin a support could bear the mount bristling above it, then remembered what it was that at first had flown from them, shrinking them, and at last had fed and swelled them. Light, weightless magnetic ions, swarms of electric ions, the misty breath of the infinite energy breathing upon, condensing upon them. Could it be that the cones, for all their apparent mass, had little, if any, weight? Like ringed Saturn, thousands of times Earth's bulk, flaunting itself in the heavens yet, if transporting to our world so light that rings, and all it would float like a bubble upon our oceans. The cones towered above me close, so close. The cones were weightless. How I knew I cannot say, but now, almost touching them, I did know. Nebulous yet solid were they, compact yet tenuous, dense and unsubstantial. Again the thought came to me, they were force made visible, energy made concentrate into matter. We skirted, seeking for the tablet over which the keeper had hovered, the mechanism which, under his tentacles, had shifted the circling shields, thrust the spear of green fire into the side of the wounded sun. Hesitantly, I touched the crystal base. The edge was warm, but whether this warmth came from the dazzling rain, which we had just watched build it outward, or whether it was a property inherent with the substance itself, I do not know. Certainly there was no mark upon it to show where the molten mists had fallen. It was diamond, hard and smooth. The nearest cones were but a scant 9 feet from its rim. Suddenly we saw the tablet, stood beside it. The shape of a great T, glimmering with a faint and limpid violet phosphorescence, it might have been, in shape and size, the palely shining shadow of the keeper. It was a foot above the floor, and had apparently no connection with the cones. It was made of thousands of close-packed, tiny, octagonal rods, the tops of some of which were cupped, of others pointed. None was more than half an inch in width. There was about it a suggestion of wedded crystal and metal, as, about its burden, was the suggestion of mated energy and matter. The rods were movable. They formed a keyboard unimaginably complex, a keyboard whose infinite combinations were like a fourth-dimensional chess game. I saw that only the swarms of tentacles that were the keeper's hands, and these only could be masters of its incredible intricacies. No disc knot, even the emperor, no star shape could play on it, draw out its chords of power. But why? Why had it been so made that sullen, flaming cross alone could release its hidden meanings, made articulate its interwoven octaves? And how were its messages conveyed? Up to its bases pressed the dormant cubes, that under it they lay as well, I did not doubt. There was no visible copula of the tablet with cones, no antennae between it and the circled shields. Could it be that the impulses released by the keeper's coilings passed through the metal people of the pave on the upthrust metal people of the crater rim who held the shields? That was unthinkable, because if so, this mechanism was superfluous. The swift response to the communal will that we had observed showed that the metal monster needed nothing of this kind for transmission of the thought of any of its units. There was some gap here, a gap that the grouped consciousness could not bridge without other means. Clearly that was true, else why the tablet, why the keeper's travail? Was each of these tiny rods a mechanism akin, in a fashion, to the sending keys of the wireless? Were they transmitters of subtle energy in which was enfolded command? Spellers out of a supermorse carrying to each responsive cell of the metal monster the bidding of those higher units which were to it as the brain cells are to us. That, advanced as the knowledge it implied might be, was closer to the heart of the possible. I bent, determined, despite the well-nigh unconquerable shrinking I felt, to touch the tablet's rods. A flickering shadow fell upon me, a flock of pulsating ochreous and scarlet shadows. The keeper glowed above us. In a life that has had its share of dangers, its need for quick decisions, I recognize that few indeed of my reactions to peril have been more than purely instinctive. No more consciously courageous nor intellectually dissociate from the activating stimulus than the shrinking of the burned hand from the brand, the will to live dictated rush of the cornered animal upon the thing menacing it. One such higher functioning was when I followed Larry O'Keefe and Lackler, the handmaiden, out to what we believed soul-destroying death in a place almost as strange as this. Another was now. Deliberately, detachedly, I studied the angrily flaming shape. See the moon pool, and the conquest of the moon pool. Compared to it, we were as a pair of hop-o'-my-thumbs to the giant. Had it been man-shaped, we would have come less than a third way up to its knees. I focused my attention upon the 20-foot-wide square that was the keeper's foot. Its surface was jewel-smooth. High and yet beneath it was a suggestion of granulation, of close-backed, innumerable microscopic crystals. Within these grains, whose existence was more sensed than seen, glowed dull red light, smoky and sullen. At each end of the square, close to the bottom, was a diamond-shaped lozenge, cabochon, perhaps a yard in width. These were dim yellow, translucent, with no suggestion of the underlying crystallization. Sense organs, I set them down to be similar to the great ovals within the Emperor's golden zone. My gaze traveled up to the transverse arms. They stretched 60 feet from tip to tip. At each tip were two more of the diamond figures, not dull, but burning angrily with orange and scarlet luster. In the center of the beam was something that might have been a smoldering rubrous reflection of the Emperor's pulsing multicolored rose, had each of the petals of the latter been clipped and squared. It deepened toward its heart into a singular pattern of vermilion latticings. Into the entire figure ran numerous tiny rivulets of angry crimson and orange light, angling in interwoven patterns with never a curve nor arching. Set at intervals between them were what looked like octagonal rosettes filled with slender silvery flutings. One striations like it came to me immense chrysanthemum buds, half opened and carved in grey jade. Above towered the gigantic vertical beam. Toward its top, I glimpsed a huge square of flaring crimsons and bright topaz. Two other diamonds stared down upon us from just beneath it like eyes, and over all its height the striated octagons clustered. I felt myself lifted, floated upward. Drake's hand shot out, clung to me as together we drifted up the living wall. Opposite the latticed heart of the square-petaled rose our flight was checked. There for an instant we hung. Then the octagonal symbols stirred, unfolded like buds. They were the nests of the keeper's tentacles, and out from them the whip-like tendrils uncoiled, shot out and writhed toward us. My skin flinched from their touch. My body, held in the unseen grip, was motionless. Yet when they touched, their contact was not unpleasant. They were like flexible strands of glass. Their smooth tips questioned us, passing through our hair, searching our faces, writhing over our clothing. There was a pulse in the great clipped rose, a rhythmic throbbing of vermilion fire that ran into it from the angled veins, beat through the latticed nucleus, and throbbed back whence it had come. The huge, high square of scarlet and yellow was liquid flame. The diamond organs beneath it seemed to smoke, to send out swirls of orange-red vapor. Holding us, so the keeper studied us. The rhythm of the square rose became the rhythm of my own mind. But here was none of the vast, serene and elemental calm that Ruth had described as emanating from the metal emperor. Powerful it was, without doubt, but in it were undertones of rage, of impatience, overtones of revolt, something incomplete and struggling. Within the disharmonies, I seemed to sense a fettered force striving for freedom, energy battling against itself. Greater grew the swarms of the tentacles winding about us like slender strands of glass, covering our faces, making breathing more and more difficult. There was a coil of them around my throat and tightening. I heard Drake gasping, laboring for breath. I could not turn my head toward him, could not speak. Was this then to be our end? The strangling clutch relaxed, the mass of the tentacles lessened. I was conscious of a surge of anger through the cruciform thing that held us. Its sullen fires blazed. I was aware of another light beating past, us beating down the keepers. The hosts of tendrils drew back from me. I felt myself picked from the unseen grasp, whirled in the air and drawn away. Drake beside me. I hung now before the shining disk, the metal emperor. He it was who had plucked us from the keeper, and even as I swung I saw the keeper's multitudinous, serpentine arms surge out toward us angrily, and then sullenly, slowly, draw back into their nests. And out of the disk, clothing me, permeating me, came an immense tranquility, a muting of all human thought, all human endeavor, an unthinkable, cosmic calm into which all that was human of me seemed to be sinking, drowning as in a fathomless abyss. I struggled against it, desperately, striving in study of the disk to erect a barrier of preoccupation against the power pouring from it. A dozen feet away from us, the sapphire ovals centered upon us their regard. They were limpid, pellucid as gems whose giant replicas they seemed to be. The surface of the disk, ringed about by the aureate zodiac, in which the 9 ovals shone, was a maze of geometric symbols traced in the lines of living gem fires. Infinitely complex those patterns, and infinitely beautiful. An infinite number of symmetric forms in which I seem to trace all the ordered crystalline wonders of the snowflakes, the groupings of all crystalline patternings, the soul of ordered beauty, that are the marvels of the radiolaria, nature's own miraculous book of the soul of mathematical beauty. The flashing, petaled heart was woven of living rainbows of cold flame. Silently we floated there while the disk looked at us. And as though I had been not an actor but an observer, the weird picture of it all came to me, two men swinging like motes in mid-air. On one side the flickering scarlet and orange cruciform shape, on the other side the radiant disk, behind the two mannequins the pallid mount of the bristling cones, and high above the wan circle of the shields. There was a ringing about us, an elfin chiming, sweet and crystalline. It came from the cones and, strangely, was it their vocal synthesis, their voice? Into the vast circle of sky pierced a lance of green fire. Swift in its wake uprose others. We slid gently down, stood swaying at the disk's base. The keeper bent, angled. Again the planes above the supporting square hovered over the tablet. The tendrils swept down, pushed here and there, playing upon the rods some unknown symphony of power. Thicker pulsed the lances of the aurora, changed to vast billowing curtains. The faceted wheel at the top of the central spire of the cones swung upward. A light began to stream from the cones themselves, no pillar now, but a vast circle that shot whirling into the heavens like a noose. And like a noose it caught the aurora, snared it. Into it the coruscating mists of mysterious flame swirled, lost their colors, became a torrent of light flying down through the ring as though through a funnel top. Down poured the radiant corpuscles, bathing the cones. They did not glow as they had beneath the flood from the shields, and if they grew it was too slowly for me to see. The shields were motionless. Now here, now there, I saw the other rings whirl up smaller mouths of lesser cones hidden within the body of the metal monster. I knew, sucking down this magnetic flux, these countless ions gushing forth from the sun. Then, as when first we had seen the phenomenon in the valley of the blue poppies, the ring vanished, hidden by a fog of coruscations as, though the force streaming through the rings became diffused after it had been caught. Crouching, forgetful of our juxtaposition to these two unhuman, anomalous things, we watched the play of the tentacles upon the upthrust rods. But if we forgot, we were not forgotten. The Emperor slipped nearer, seemed to contemplate us quizzically, amused, as a man would look down upon some curious and interesting insect, a puppy, a kitten. I sensed this amusement in the disk's regard even as I had sensed its soul of awful tranquility, as we had sensed the playful malice in the eye stars of the living corridor, the curiosity in the column that had dropped us into the valley. I felt a pusher push that was filled with a colossal, glittering playfulness. Under it I went spinning away for yards, Drake twirling close behind me. The force, whatever it was, swept out from the Emperor, but in it was no slightest hint of anger or of malice, no slightest shadow of the sinister. Rather it was as though one would blow away a feather, urge gently some little lesser thing away. The disk watched our whirlings with a sparkling, jeweled laughter in its pulsing radiance. Again came the push farther, yet we spun. Suddenly before us, across the pave, shone out a twinkling trail, the awakened eyes of the cubes that formed it, marking out a pathway for us to follow. Immediately upon their gleaming forth, I saw the Emperor turn his immense, oval, metallic back, now black, against the radiance of the cones. Up from the narrow, gleaming path a path opened I knew by some command lifted the hosts of tiny, unseen hands, the sentient currents of magnetic force that were the fingers and arms of the metal hordes. They held us, thrust us along, passed us forward. Faster and faster we moved, speeding on the wake of the long-vanished metal monks. I turned my head. The cones were already far away. Over the tablet of limpid violet phosphorescence still hovered the planes of the keeper, and still was the oval of the emperor black against the radiance. But the twinkling, sparkling path between us and them was gone, was fading out close behind us as we swept onward. Faster and faster grew our pace. The cylindrical wall loomed close. A high oblong portal showed within it. Into this we were carried. Before us stretched a corridor precisely similar to that which, closing upon us, had forced us completely out into the hall. Unlike that passage, its floor lifted steeply a smooth and shining slide up which no man could climb. A shaft, indeed, which thrust upward straight as an arrow at an angle of at least 30 degrees, and whose end or turning we could not see. Up and up it cleared its way through the city, through the metal monster closed only by the inability of the eye to pierce the faint luminosity that, thickened by distance, became impenetrable. For an instant we hovered upon its threshold, but the impulse, the command that had carried us thus far was not to stop here. Into it and up it we were thrust, our feet barely touching the glimmering surface, lifted by the force that emanated from its floor, carried on by the force that pressed out from the sides. Up and up we went, scores of feet, hundreds. Chapter 22. The Ensorcelled Chamber. Goodwin, Drake broke the silence. Desperately he was striving to keep his fear out of his voice. Goodwin, this isn't the way to get out. We're going up farther away all the time from the gates. What can we do? My anxiety was no less than his, but my realization of our helplessness was complete. If we only knew how to talk to these things, he said. If we could only have let the disc know we wanted to get out, damn it, Goodwin, it would have helped us. Grotesque as the idea sounded, I felt that he spoke the truth. The Emperor meant no harm to us. In fact, in speeding us away, I was not at all sure that he had not deliberately wished us. Well, there was that about the keeper. Still up, we sped along the shaft. I knew we must now be above the level of the valley. We've got to get back to Ruth, Goodwin Knight, and what may have happened to her. Drake, boy, I dropped into his own colloquialism. We're up against it. We can't help it. And remember, she's there in Norhala's home. I honestly don't believe, Dick, that there's any danger as long as she remains there, and Ventnor ties her fast. That's true, he said, more hopefully. That's true, and probably Norhala is with her by now. I don't doubt it, I said cheerfully. An idea came to me. I half believed it myself. And another thing, there's not an action here that's purposeless. We're being driven on by the command of that thing we call the Metal Emperor. It means us no harm. Maybe this is the way out. Maybe so, he shook his head doubtfully. But I'm not sure. Maybe that long push was just to get us away from there. And it strikes me that the impulse has begun to weaken. We're not going anywhere near as fast as we were. I had not realized it, but our speed was slackening. I looked back. Hundreds of feet behind us fell the slide. An unpleasant chill went through me. Should the magnetic grip upon us relax, withdraw, nothing could stop us from falling back along that incline to be broken like eggs at its end. That our breaths would be snuffed out by the terrific descent long before we reached that end was scant comfort. There are other passages opening up along this shaft, Drake said. I'm not for trusting the Emperor too far. He has other things on his metallic mind, you know. The next one we get to, let's try to slip into if we can. I had noticed there had been openings along the ascending shaft, corridors running apparently transversely to its angled way. Slower and slower became our pace. 100 yards above I glimpsed one of the apertures. Could we reach it? Slower and slower we arose. Now the gap was but a yard off, but we were motionless, were tottering. Drake's arms wrapped round me. With a tremendous effort he hurled me into the portal. I dropped at its edge, writhed swiftly around, saw him slipping down, thrust my hands out to him. He caught them. There came a wrench that tortured my arm sockets as though racked, but he held. Slowly I writhed back into the passage, dragging up his almost dead weight. His head appeared, his shoulders. There was a convulsion of the long body, and he lay before me. For a minute or two we lay, flat upon our backs, resting. I sat up. The passage was broad, silent, apparently as endless as that from which we had just escaped. Along it, above us, under us, the crystalline eyes were dim. It showed no sign of movement yet. Had it done so, there was nothing we could do save drop down the annihilating slant. Drake arose. I'm hungry, he said, and I'm thirsty. I move that we eat and drink and approximately be merry. He slung aside the haversack. From it we took food. From the canteens we drank. We did not talk. Each knew what the other was thinking, infrequently, and thank the eternal law that some call God for that, come crises in which speech seems not only petty, but when against it the mind rebels as a nauseous thing. This was such a time. At last I drew myself to my feet. Let's be going, I said. The corridor stretched straight before us. Along it we paced. How far we walked I do not know. Mile upon mile it seemed. It broadened abruptly into a vast hall. And this hall was filled with the metal hordes, was a gigantic workshop of them. In every shape, in every form, they seethed and twirled about it. Upon its floor were heaps of shining ores, mounds of flashing gems, piles of ingots, metallic and crystalline. High and low throughout flamed the egg-shaped incandescences, floating furnaces both great and small. Before one of these forges, close to us, stood a metal thing. Its body was a 12-foot column of smaller cubes. Upon the top was a hollow square formed of even lesser blocks hardly larger than the little things themselves. In the center of the open rectangle was another shaft, its top a 2-foot square plate formed of a single cube. From the sides of the hollow square sprang long arms of spheres, each tipped by a tetrahedron. They moved freely, slipping about upon their curved points of contact, and like a dozen little thinking hammers, the pyramid points at their ends beat down upon as many thimble-shaped objects, which they thrust alternately into the unwinking brazier, then laid upon the central block to shape. A goblin workman the thing seemed, standing there, so intent upon and so busy with its forgings. There were scores of these animate machines. They paid no slightest heed to us as we slipped by them. clinging as closely to the wall of the immense workshop as we could. We passed a company of other shapes which stood 2 by 2 and close together, their tops wide spinning wheels through which the tendrils of an opened globe fed translucent, colourless ingots, the substance, it seemed to me, of which Norhala's shadowy walls were made, the crystal of which the bars that built out the base of the cones were formed. The ingots passed between the whirling faces, emerged from them as slender, long cylinders, were seized as they slipped down by a crouching block, whose place as it glided away was instantly taken by another. In many bewildering forms, intent upon unknown activities directed toward unguessable ends, the composite, animate mechanisms labored. And all the place was filled with a goblin bustle, trollish racketings, ringing of gnomish anvils, clanging of kobold forges, a clamorous cavern filled with metal nibelungens. We came to the opening of another passage, a doorway piercing the walls of the workshop. Its incline, though steep, was not dangerous. Into it we stepped, climbed onward, it seemed interminably. Far ahead of us at last appeared the outline of its further entrance, silhouetted against and filled with a brighter luminosity. We drew near, stopped cautiously at its threshold, peering out. Well it was that we had hesitated. Before us was open space, an abyss in the body of the metal monster. The corridor opened into it like a window. Thrusting out our heads, we saw an unbroken wall both above and below. Half a mile away was its opposite side. Over this pit was a misty sky, and not more than 1,000 feet above and black against the heavens was the lip of it, the cornices of this chasm within the city. Far, far beneath us, we watched the hordes throw themselves across the abyss in webs of curving arches and girder-straight bridges. Gigantic, we knew these spans must be yet dwarfed to slender footways by distance. Over them moved hurrying companies. From them came flashings, glitterings prismatic, sun golden, plutonic scarlets, molten blues, javelins of colored light piercing upward from unfolded cubes and globes and pyramids crossing them, or from busy bearers of the shining fruits of the mysterious workshops. And as they passed, the bridges swung up, coiled and thrust themselves from sight through openings that closed behind them. Ever, as they passed, close on their going whipped out other spans, so that always across that abyss a sentient, shifting web was hung. We drew back, stared into each other's white face. Panic swept through me, in quick, alternate pulse of ice and fire. For crushingly, no longer to be denied, came certainty that we were lost within the mazes of this incredible city, lost in the body of the metal monster which that city was. There was a sick despair in my heart as we turned and slowly made our way back along the sloping corridor. 100 yards, perhaps, we had gone in silence before we stopped, gazing stupidly at an opening in the wall beside us. The portal had not been there when we had passed, of that I was certain. "It's opened since we went by," whispered Drake. We peered through it. The passage was narrow. Its pave led downward. For a moment we hesitated, the same foreboding in both our minds. And yet among the perils that crowded in upon us, what choice had we? There could be no more danger there than here. Both ways were live, both obedient to impulses over which we had no more control, and no more way of predetermining than mice in some complex, man-made trap. Furthermore, this shaft also ran downward, and although its pitch was less, and it did not therefore drop as quickly toward that level we sought, and wherein lay the openings of escape into the outer valley. It fell at right angles to the corridor through which we had come. We knew that to retrace our steps now would but take us back to the forges, and thence to the hall of the cones, and the certain peril waiting for us there. We stepped into this opened way. For a little distance it ran straightly, then turned and sloped gently upward, and a little distance more we climbed. Then suddenly, not 100 yards from us, gushed out a flood of soft radiance, opalescent, filled with pearly glimmerings and rosy shadows of light. It was as though a door had opened into some world of luminescence. From it the lambent torrent poured, billowed down upon us. In its wake came music, if music, the mighty harmonies, the sonorous chords, the crystalline themes, and the linked chaplet of notes that were like spiralings of tiny golden star bells could be named. Toward source of light and sound we moved, nor could we have halted nor withdrawn had we willed. The radiance drew us to it as the sun the water drop, and irresistibly the sweet, unearthly music called. Closer we came it was a narrow alcove from which sound and light poured into it. We crept and went no further. We peered into a vast and columnless vault, a limitless temple of light. High up in it, strewn manifold, danced and shone soft orbs like tender suns. No pale gilt luminaries of frozen rays were these. Effulgent, jubilant, they flamed orbs red as wine of rubies that jinns of Al-Shiraz press from his enchanted vineyards of jewels. Twin orbs rosy white as breasts of pampered Babylonian maids. Orbs of pulsing opalescences and orbs of the murmuring green of bursting buds of spring. Crocused orbs and orbs of royal coral. Suns that throbbed with singing rays of wedded rose and pearl, and of sapphires and topazes amorous. Orbs born of cool virginal dawns, and of imperial sunsets, and orbs that were the tuliped fruit of mating rainbows of fire. They danced, these countless aureoles. They swung and threaded in radiant choral patterns, in linked harmonies of light. And as they danced, their gay rays caressed and bathed myriads of the metal folk open beneath them. Under the rays, the jewel fires of disk and star and cross leaped and pulsed and danced to the same bright rhythm. We sought the source of the musica tremendous thing of shimmering crystal pipes like some colossal organ. Out of the radiance around it, great flames gathered, shook into sight with streamings and pennonings, in bannerets and bandrols, leaped upon the crystal pipes, and merged within them. And as the pipes drank them, the flames changed into sound. Throbbing bass vials of roaring vernal winds, diapasons of waterfall and torrents, these had been flames of emerald. Flaming trumpetings of desire that had been great streamers of scarlet rose flames that had dissolved into echoes of fulfillment. Diamond burgeonings that melted into silver symphonies, like mist-entangled Pleiades, transmuted into melodies. Chameleon harmonies to which the strange suns danced. And now I saw, realizing with a clutch of indescribable awe, with a sense of inexplicable profanation, the secret of this ensorcelled chamber. Within every pulsing rose of irised fire that was the heart of a disk, from every rubrous, clipped rose of a cross, and from every rayed purple petiling of a star, there nestled a tiny disk, a tiny cross, a tiny star, luminous and symboled even as those that cradled them. The metal babes building like crystals from hearts of radiance, beneath the play of jocund orbs. incredible blossomings of crystal and of metal, whose lullabies and cradle songs were singing symphonies of flame. It was the birth chamber of the city, the womb of the metal monster. Abruptly, the walls of the niche sparkled out, the glittering eye points regarding us with a most disquieting suggestion of sentinels who, slumbering, had been caught unaware, and now awakening challenged us. Swiftly, the niche closed so swiftly that barely had we time to spring over its threshold into the corridor. The corridor was awake alive. The power darted out, gripped us. Up it swept us and on. Far away a square of light appeared, grew quickly larger. Framed in it was the amethystine burning of the great ring that girdled the encircling cliffs. I turned my head behind us. The corridor was closing. Now the opening was so close that through it I could see the vast panorama of the valley. The wall behind us touched us, pushed us on. We thrust ourselves against it, despairingly, as well might flies have tried to press back a moving mountain. Resistingly, inexorably we were pressed forward. Now we cowered within a yard-deep niche. Now we trembled upon a foot-wide ledge. Shuddering, gasping, we glared down the sheer drop of the city's wall. The smooth and glimmering scarp fell thousands of feet straight to the valley floor, and there were no merciful mists to hide what awaited us there, no mists anywhere. In that brief, agonized glance, every detail of the pit was disclosed with an abnormal clarity. We tottered on the brink. The ledge melted. Down, down we plunged, locked in each other's arms, hurtling to the shattering death so far below.